Direi che possiamo iniziare. Io prenderò solo pochi minuti e parlerò in italiano per facilitare i lavori di traduzione e quindi spero che le traduttrici siano ok. Grazie. E intanto benvenuti, io sono Erika Grasso, sono felicissima di essere qui, molto onorata, e vorrei iniziare innanzitutto ringraziando gli organizzatori e tutto lo staff per avermi permesso di partecipare a questo convegno, che mi sembra un'occasione ricca e preziosa, soprattutto per chi come me lavora nel contesto italiano, in cui alcuni temi iniziano ad essere pregnanti e importanti adesso, e quindi il dibattito è ancora un po' giovane rispetto ad alcune tematiche che sono state affrontate ieri e di cui parleremo oggi, che riguardano il patrimonio africano conservato nei nostri musei in Italia e in Europa. E sono molto felice anche di aprire con questo panel, Heritage and Museum, Musealization, Conservation, Digital, Restoration, Research, Studying and Cataloging, un sacco di parole chiave, e che però risuonano moltissimo con la mia esperienza professionale. Io sono un'antropologa culturale con esperienza di ricerca sul campo in Africa e che però da ormai qualche anno lavora presso il sistema museale dell'Università di Torino, avendo a che fare, occupandomi principalmente delle collezioni non europee conservate nell'università e anche in alcuni casi in altre istituzioni pubbliche torinesi. Il mio lavoro attuale, il mio lavoro di ricerca, ma anche di conservatrice e curatrice museale, riguarda strettamente quelle che vengono definite le biografie degli oggetti e delle collezioni, e in particolare quelli africani che stanno nei depositi e negli allestimenti dei musei piemontesi e dell'università. E il mio lavoro negli ultimi anni si è concentrato moltissimo su, creare una base di lavoro per il Museo di Antropologia dell'Università, perché ci sia una ricerca più approfondita rispetto alla provenance delle collezioni, come primo passo per la loro valorizzazione attraverso soprattutto una collaborazione e un dialogo con le comunità diasporiche. Questo è parte di un viaggio, di un lavoro che è lungo, che guarda sul lungo termine, che è complesso e che può e secondo me deve raggiungere, o forse per meglio dire ritornare alle comunità, alle source community da cui il patrimonio africano con cui io lavoro, con cui lavoriamo in museo, da cui arriva. E arrivo al punto, stiamo esplorando questi temi in modo molto intensivo e denso e con veramente tanto impegno con il gruppo di lavoro ICOM sulla provenance, qui ICOM Italia, che oggi rappresento con la nostra coordinatrice Sofia Bollo. Il gruppo è nato ormai già qualche mese fa ed è uno spazio prezioso in cui professionisti da diversi musei italiani, ricercatori, scholars e anche studenti di PhD e figure di diverso tipo hanno modo di incontrarsi, di scambiare punti di vista, prospettive, ma anche buone pratiche. E l'obiettivo è quello non solo di contribuire al dibattito italiano ed europeo, ma anche quello di sviluppare linee guida anche molto essenziali, ma che ci siano, che possano guidare il nostro lavoro sulla ricerca riguardo alla provenance con una prospettiva decoloniale profonda. Ma arriviamo al nostro panel che affronterà temi che spesso affrontiamo anche noi nel gruppo, che hanno a che fare con la provenance, ma anche con la giustizia e la riparazione, e poi anche con la conservazione e l'accessibilità. E le 3 presentazioni che ascolteremo questa mattina sono molto interessanti in questo senso, perché mostrano veramente come in modi diversi il patrimoni di diversa natura, di diverso tipo, tutti necessitino di essere considerati sia nella loro materialità, dai saperi, dalle tecniche che hanno permesso la loro produzione ai bisogni della conservazione in museo, quindi la materialità in ampio senso, però anche e soprattutto nella loro immaterialità, e quindi uno sguardo particolare, si è detto anche ieri, ai valori e alle memorie e ai ricordi che condensano sulla loro superficie. E le presentazioni sentiremo parlare di resti umani, di musica e di moda, e tutti e tre i casi studio, anche se sono molto diversi, fanno emergere come fenomeni collettivi e poi da una parte memorie individuali e comunitarie si intreccino e richiedano da parte nostra riflessioni sensibili sia riguardo la storia museale delle collezioni e del patrimonio, sia, credo in modo più importante, dei sentimenti e delle memorie delle comunità e degli individui da cui hanno avuto origine. In questo senso, con questo chiudo, le nuove tecnologie e la digitalizzazione credo siano un nucleo centrale da cui partire per ridefinire vecchie prospettive, vecchie pratiche e per pensarne di nuove. Non l'ho detto prima, abbiamo deciso di lasciare le domande tutte dopo le tre presentazioni, e quindi lascio la parola a Remigia Dinon, che lavora da molto tempo, dal 2011, presso l'Africa Museum di Tervuren, e si occupa di musica tra antropologia e musicologia, e a Tervuren sempre documenta e fa ricerca sulle collezioni provenienti dall'Africa centrale, facendo particolare attenzione all'uso delle tecnologie della digitalizzazione per la circolazione e la promozione della musica tradizionale africana. La sua presentazione è dal titolo Managing Sound Archives at the Africa Museum in Tervuren, Belgium, Issues and Experiences.
Grazie Erika. I want first to thank Juliana first and all the committees of ICOM and all the people present here for having me today and listening to me on this early morning. So, in 2021 and 2023, the Kenyan sound artist Kamaru conducted his artistic research at the Africa Museum consulting in Sound Archive. His research resulted in the creation of two works entitled Temporary Store 1 and 2. His critical approach raises questions about the accessibility, reappropriation, and the reappropriation of sound archives, contexting them with the history of colonial violence. The African Museum Sounds Library contains recording of musical traditions and oral narrative from African societies. It's then necessary to address the issue of ownership, access, reuse condition in a way that respects the rights of the people to whom this heritage belongs. The management of Sound Archives was also anthropological, legal, and political issue that do not have obvious practical solutions. The legal framework surrounding these ethical and political issues invites us to reflect on our archiving methods and more broadly on the role and place of musicology within the museum with colonial origin. So you heard a lot about the African Museum. Here we have some numbers. And I have to say that the Africa Museum originated from the colonial section of the 1897 Brussels World Fair, after King Leopold II decided to relocate it to a new building called Le Palais des Colonies in Tervuren. The museum was conceived as a propaganda tool to promote its colonial project with the aim of attracting investors and gaining a popular support from the Belgian people. And it was a success. This fair attracting over 1 million visitors, that was a third of the whole Belgian population at the time. But it also caused the death of 7 Congolese people being there for the exhibition. This temporary exhibition became to be the first permanent museum from Congo in Belgium the year after. And from the beginning, the institution has served as both a museum and a scientific research center. Over the past century, museum staff and collaborators have recorded a wide variety of music from Central Africa. Initially, the focus was on collecting musical form and associated objects. Today, the emphasis is on studying how musical practices have transformed in response to some significant changes as new technologies or community engagement. The so-called ethnomusicology was established as a scientific field within the museum in 1966. The sound library contains a total of more than 3,000 hours of music, with the oldest recording dating back to 1910. The sound archive contains some unpublished first-hand collection, it's about 40% roughly, as well as edited recordings published by record labels. It's 60% of the collection, are LP, CD that were found on the market. The first project to digitize the sound archive with a focus on preservation and metadata was the DECMA project. Digitalisatie van de Koninklijk van de Ethnomusicalies. I'll let you read that. Sorry, I didn't speak. So this project started in 2003. It took 5 years. At this time, there was an urgent need to prevent the physical deterioration of the oldest media. The project has resulted in the creation of an online database that makes exploring the sound archive much easier. However, due to technical and copyright issues, access to the recording has not been yet granted. Since 2020, a reproduction request form was introduced to regulate access to sound archives. This has clearly proved to be an obstacle for users wishing to consult the recording. Indeed, access to sound archive involves balancing two conflict interests. In one hand, there is a growing demand for accessibility, particularly in the light of the development of open science and the decolonization of knowledge. On the other hand, there is a need to control access in order to ensure compliance with the intellectual property right. The DECMA project, the platform, was developed more than 20 years ago, and reached its limits. It works as an inventory, still the work that I'm using still today, but does not facilitate the scientific management required to meet the current needs. Today, to increase accessibility, all digital items should be centralized on one open access platform, aligning with the care and fair principle management. This principle should ensure that the collections are managed, documented, and shared in a way that respects scientific standards and ethical responsibilities. That's why we are currently working on a new platform called B-Music. The name can change. And the B-Music project aims to provide a digital access to musical instrument collection, sound archive, photographs, and field notes from the African Museum, but also from the Music Instrument Museum in Brussels, bringing them together on a new discovery platform. This platform will also offer the possibility of integrating primary source material from civilian experts. But the first step in managing the IPR is to develop a protocol for identifying right orders. This process involves identifying individuals, such as performers and collectors, as well as producing organizations such as labels and cultural institutions. It's also very important to know the dates of recording and publication, which are used to calculate the length of the neighboring right or the mechanical right. But identification is a very time-consuming activity, and names are often not provided. And I would like to thank you here, all the volunteers that joined us the last year in this project to try to identify the names. You should see Frank enjoying the picture, but there was 3 more. The lack of information on cultural context represent a significant challenge when it comes to managing ethical issues. We are therefore trying to develop some partnership with African cultural institutions, university, museum, in a view to working together on ethnographic research, collective listening session, and collaboration with communities/societies/people. I hope everybody's will agree. Regarding unpublished archives and missing names, we'll use the legal category of orphan works, defined as the works whose author names are unknown or cannot be found, even after diligent search. Classifying this work as orphan works will allow us to share them online despite the lack of author information. However, this classification could not be definitive, and a right order must be found. On the slide, you can see the screenshot at the bottom of the very first sound recording that we had at the European database. We have listed the Armoire as the collector and therefore the legal producer of the recording, but the Bobatic Group as the cultural owner and bearer. This is not a legal value, but it recognizes at least the community ownerships. and it allows us to skip the limitation of the current European law. It's also important to highlight the difficulty that communities, societies, people, particularly those in rural areas, face in accessing continuous internet connection. But who use the Sans archives? Mostly researchers. They are used for research projects, such as this one that's currently ongoing called Resourcing. The project involves studying a collection of xylophones from different cultural origin, construction, and sounds. And the project, we're developing a website that facilitates a decentralized approach to co-creation and participatory creative action. And now I invite you to all scan the QR code. This is the fun moment of the day. Like this, you can scan it. You scan the QR code, you can play the instrument using an interactive virtual keyboards and download the sound sample for your whole musical project. We have a small discussion about it after. Of course, artists use also the Sans archives. Since 2008, the African Museum has offered residencies to Central African artists to study, work on, and with the collection. The residency lasts between 1 and 3 months and involves research relating to the collection or the work of the museum. The relationship between artists and the Sound Archive is multiple, but few artists have truly used the historical sources, the sound file in this case, as the basis for the creating art. And more recently, an interest growing to students. As part of the new international program at the Lucas School of Art in Brussels, students were invited to explore the use of archival audio materials. And they're encouraged to visit the African Museum and use the sound for its archive to create a video exercise. And I want to conclude my presentation with feedback of a very recent program, share program. An attempt to share African Sound Archive with the African authorities. So as part of the so-called share program, in 2021, the African Museum transferred 4,000 musical recordings of Rwandan musical tradition from its collection to the Rwanda Cultural Heritage Academy, namely the Ineko Yumucho. As you can see in the picture, a ceremony was held at the Rwanda Art Museum in Kigali, where the Belgian ambassador to Rwanda, Bert Vermeulen, handed over a hard drive containing a copy of this musical heritage to the Academy General Director, Robert Masosera. There were 2 big parts in this project, in the musical project. One was sharing the Sans Archive. The other one was creating a new Sans Archive. But there was a but. From the beginning, there was a big issue regarding the metadata accompanying the Sans Archive. The Rwandan musical archive from the African Museum were mostly collected in the second half of the 20th century, at a time when the ethnic ideology was a social reality that led to the 1994 genocide. References to ethnic groups, as they were understood before the genocide, are present in Sans Archive and in the metadata. As you can listen, when we sit at the table with the colleagues, it was the very first recording, and just that mention Hutu was enough to stop the sharing this whole, the public in the country. That's why the Ineko Yumucho addresses this issue by selecting and reading the Sans Archive, but it's a big impact in the limitation of the sharing. So now I will invite you to watch a video that was created. That was created at the end of the project that I consider as a film, but it was created to raise public awareness on the shared heritage. It has been posted on the Ineko Yumucho YouTube channel and shared on the African Museum and MIM Facebook pages.
Par le projet Share, on a acquis beaucoup de connaissances concernant la prise des images audiovisuelles. On a travaillé sur beaucoup de projets dans les 2 années passées. On a enregistré la troupe Urugangazi, on a enregistré les jeunes joueurs des instruments traditionnels comme Théo Mouchavizi, et il y a les autres vieux chanteurs qui utilisent les instruments traditionnels. On a enregistré leurs sons pour que les futurs Rwandais qui vont venir dans les années prochaines, ils vont voir les archives. Aujourd'hui, on est en train de construire un site web pour qu'il soit intégré avec notre site web de l'Académie. On va sauvegarder ces archives, ces vidéos, ces audios pour que tout les Rwandais et les autres personnes peuvent en avoir accès. Ils peuvent aussi se référer sur les archives sonores que nous avons aussi pour faire la comparaison avec les années passées pour voir s'il y a une différence ou bien une continuité à propos des sons et aussi à propos de la qualité ou bien du contenu des chansons passées et des chansons d'aujourd'hui.
On a commencé à rencontrer quelques artistes très intéressés et on les a donné quelques éléments des archives sonores et ils ont déjà commencé à les utiliser en s'inspirant de l'héritage j'ai déjà dit. Parmi d'autres artistes, on a une troupe de danse qui s'appelle Ugangazi, qui a commencé à utiliser les archives sonores, mais aussi un artiste talentueux, Makembe, qui les touche, qui les utilise, qui mélange des sons, des archives sonores avec les instruments modernes, avec la production des studios modernes.
My work, usually I do music archiving of Rwanda, and I've been touring Rwanda since 2018. The idea was to bring vocals in my studios, to bring those instruments, to bring audios that I recorded on the set, just to sample them, to bring them in a new rhythm, new style. Through my journey of recording traditional musicians, I go out with my microphone on the set and I put together people in a certain village, in a certain place in Rwanda, and they give me what I call their blues. So how I approached like a certain community, I just go in a village, spend there 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, connect with people, will study their culture, study their spirit. I introduce them to what I do. I make them listen to my work, to my songs, tell them my vision that I'm recording traditional musicians. And the reason why I came to them is to study and also to bring the information they give me, the knowledge that they give me. I want to spread it to other people. I learn from the archives. I go do research from the archive. Those archives have changed my life because they have fed me information. They have given me a knowledge. My generation nowadays, everybody's connected to hip-hop. I wanted to include those cultures together. That's like hip-hop. My generation can just, any rapper could just fit in the music, but to me the original sound, the identity of this music, it comes when I hear my traditional vocals, and I keep the tradition original and the hip hop the way it should be, just to bring the fusion alive. We can still learn from the ancestors, we can still get the knowledge from the ancestors, but just spread it to our own language too.
and the Sans Archive was not shared with the public. So what next? Oh, sorry. In June 2024, Bartol Ouvrier, the new director of Africa Museum, traveled to Rwanda, visit most of the museum in Kigali and Butare, and meet Robert Mazozera, the director of the museum in Rwanda. Both of them agreed to establish a new bilateral treaty and a scientific commission to draw up a MOU for sharing the Africa Museum archive via hard disk. So we'll repeat again and again the same story. I want to conclude to mention that there is some initiative in Rwanda concerning the restitution of intangible archive, and workshops are being organized around this initiative. 2 weeks ago, the edition September addresses, and I quote the founder, Elisha Clever, one of the most urgent and contentious issues of our time, restitution to repatriation. Who owns African heritage in a digital world? Question mark. The event brought together elders, young people, cultural practitioners, and academics to reflect on Rwandan cultural heritage. Inspiring discussion and restitution and digital preservation sparked deep emotion and reflection, as well as a commitment to action. So, in the answer to the question, who owns the Sans Archive? I would say that there are multiple possible responses, and the answer lies between the law and the ethics. Access to Sans Archive remains a subject of ongoing debate, and there is no single best practice that fits whole situation. Thank you.
Thank you. And passiamo all'ultima presentazione, velocemente. Monica Titton, Senior Scientist alla University of Applied Arts a Vienna, dove insegna storia della moda e dove fa ricerca sull'abbigliamento, l'artigianato e lo stile, come si intreccino nel discorso coloniale italiano. E non andrei oltre, la sua presentazione ha il titolo Colonial Fashion in the Archive, Object Biographies and the Musealization of Fashion Artifacts from Eritrea, Libya and Somalia in Italy's former colonial museum.
I'm a bit nervous, but so first I'd like to thank Mrs. Ericani for having me here, for having me invited as a guest in this urgently needed conference, as I feel in these 2 days. Also for having made it possible in a political context in Italy that certainly doesn't encourage these types of discussions. So it's really significant to be here. In this presentation, I will share insights from my ongoing research on the colonial archives of Italian fashion, focusing on 3 objects from Italy's former colonial museum. For the past 3 years, I have explored how fashion, craft, and colonialism became entangled in Italy during the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. Scholarship on fashion under fascism and on Italian colonialism is substantial, yet their intersection remains little studied. This gap exists because most research has emphasized fashion's role within fascism or focused on visual representations, while the material culture of colonialism has received far less attention. Often, the traces have been concealed or overlooked. My project attempts to address this absence by examining the material culture of Italian, Ethiopian, Somali, Libyan, and Eritrean fashion and crafts. A veritable turning point, and I can't stress this enough, in my research project came with the discovery of artifacts at the Museo delle Civiltà. Encountering these objects led me to adopt an object-based approach, reconstructing provenance and object biographies. They guided my further archival research and provided the framework for the ongoing study I will present today. Time does not permit a full institutional history of Italy's former colonial museum, especially with the esteemed director of the Museo delle Civiltà, Andrea Vigliani, present, and a guided museum tour scheduled on Saturday. I will therefore summarize only briefly. The Museo Coloniale was founded in Rome in 1923, inspired by institutions in Leiden, Tervuren, and Paris. While it housed varied ethnographic, botanical, zoological, and military collections, its core was the Mostra Campionaria Permanente, a traveling trade exhibition of raw and finished goods from Libya, Eritrea, Somalia, Ethiopia, and Italy. Textiles, garments, leather accessories, beads, jewelry, etc., made by Italian and African artisans. This trade exhibition predated the museum, circulating widely at national and later internationally since the 1890s until the 1960s. It pursued three goals: cultivating a colonial consciousness in Italians, displaying Italy's conquests abroad in line with other empires, and advertising the colony's commercial potential. Exhibitions of this kind, racist and exoticizing, were powerful propaganda, particularly in Italy, where illiteracy was high. After their dispersal, the collections were reunited in 2010 at the Museo delle Civiltà, where since 2022, under the directorship of Mr. Vigliani, they have been re-evaluated in a decolonial lens. And it's in this context, in 2024, that I was granted access with the guidance of in-house experts Anna Rosa Di Lella and Gaia Del Pino. As Pierre Bourdieu and Yvette Delceau argued in Le Couturier et sa Griffe, branding in fashion works as a form of magic, conferring value on otherwise ordinary objects, much like an artist's signature. Whereas fashion reinforces this symbolic power through logos, despite mass production, art still privileges singularity. When fashion enters the museum, serial items likewise become singular, but they remain fashion, not art, nor ethnographic object, and must be analyzed as such. As Nancy Troy observes, the label operates in a paradoxical way. It implies presence, yet reveals absence, signaling what Derrida calls the absolute singularity of the signature event, while remaining reproducible, insofar as every signature must resemble the others. In this light, the label embodies the contradictory tensions between originality and reproduction that structure fashion in general, and the rise of early 20th century haute couture in particular. It is with these thoughts in mind that I selected three objects from Italy's former colonial museum, precisely because they still carried labels. The first is a leopard fur coat I encountered during my initial visit at the Museo delle Civiltà's deposit. With its matching cuffs and collar, the coat bore a furrier's label, Ditta dei Marchi Torino, and a tag marked Leopardo Eritreo, Eritrean leopard, once displayed in colonial exhibitions. This ensemble exemplifies the environmental and economic impact of colonial fashion. Leopard fur was both a rare luxury and a product of extraction. Archival material from Italian fashion magazines confirms the presence of leopard fur within the visual and material language of the period. For instance, the January 1941 issue of Bellezza features a jacket with leopard cuffs and belt details. The explicit mention of Somali provenance directly ties the garment to Italy's colonial holdings and attests to leopard fur's widespread circulation at the time. The coat thus became a polyvalent signifier of exoticism and opulence in Europe, and within the Harlem Renaissance, of reclaimed African heritage. With colonial objects in particular, it is essential to consider how the regional and the global are interwoven, and to trace the continuation of these trajectories across post-colonial iterations. Leopard skin exemplifies this complexity. It has a concrete material history, rooted in colonial extraction and trade, its circulation as a modernist wardrobe staple, and its transformation into the ubiquitous leopard print in contemporary fashion. To trace these trajectories, I created an archival box, extending academic research into artistic practice. Bringing together magazines, photographs, and animal print textiles, the box made visible the colonial roots of leopard skin in modern fashion. Juxtaposing these fragments underscored both the colonial entanglements of materials and the embodied, often serendipitous process of archival work. Nedima Dafar crafted a handmade silver silk brocade vest, lined with coral taffeta silk, embroidered at the collar and fastened with 2 rows of fabric-covered buttons. Identified as a bridal farmula, a misspelling of farmla, it bears a handwritten tag with her name on it and notes its production at the School of Work Education for Muslim pupils in Tripoli. Founded in 1898 under Ottoman rule, the school combined shelter with vocational training for disadvantaged Arab and Jewish girls, partly funded through workshop sales. After Italy's 1911 occupation, its mission shifted. Theoretical education was curtailed and practical training emphasized for colonial exploitation. This illustrates the racist logic of Italian colonial rule shared by other empires' vocational schools. This hierarchy between traditional colonial crafts and metropolitan fashion echoes Victoria Rovine's theorization of the traditional and modern divide in fashion. The vest, hand-sewn with exceptional artisanal skill, is comparable to a Poiret gown, yet denied equal recognition. It prompts us to ask whether Nedima Dafar's name reveals further traces of her work. With access to Libyan archives restricted, I turned to Bosa, Sardinia, home of the now closed Pinacoteca Melchiorre Melis. Melis, a painter and ceramicist, directed the Tripoli school between 1934 and 1941, introducing ceramics. Archival fragments show he used Mediterranean reference materials for teaching and later pursued a universal Mediterranean craft language. These holdings are now locked in storage, underscoring the precarity of colonial archives. In June 2025, I revisited Dafar's vest in a group exhibition in Marseille, organized by the Fonds Dotation Maison Mode Méditerranée, which also supports my research. Asked to contribute a tangible object that illustrates my research, I developed the speculative branding project Maison Nedima Dafar Tripoli. Centered on this bridal vest, one of the very few objects in the Colonial Museum's archives bearing the name of an African artisan. The project reintroduced Dafar as a designer within fashion's history's narrative. By appropriating the logic of branding, Maison Nedima Dafar functions as an anti-brand, not a historical fashion house, but a conceptual site for thinking with the anonymous laborers and designers excluded from fashion and design history. It posits branding as a speculative practice of re-inscription, where authorship becomes collective memory work. Through this gesture, I sought to challenge the anthropological gaze that objectifies colonial artifacts, experimenting with creative practice as a decolonial method within fashion research. Meanwhile, the artifacts from the former Colonial Museum continue their itinerary as traveling objects. This photograph shows some of them within Christoph Büchel's formidable 2024 exhibition Monte di Pietà at Fondazione Prada in Venice. Spread across 3 floors and more than 20 chambers, Büchel created a labyrinth of thousands of objects in a multi-layered survey of debt, value, and credit in the history of capitalism. The sudden reappearance of these fashion objects, among the hundreds of artifacts on loan from Rome's Museo delle Civiltà, after decades in storage, within an exhibition on debt, was no coincidence. Büchel exposed how colonial extraction underpins systems of value and exchange, reminding me that these artifacts are not inert remnants, but circulating actors, and pushing me to see visuality not as illustration, but as an epistemological stance, a way of producing knowledge and opening decolonial pathways in fashion scholarship. One such artifact was the dark blue linen-bound dye pattern book produced by the Swiss company J.R. Geigi S.A. It illustrates the dyeing properties of animal and plant fibers from the Italian colonies. Divided by materials such as wool, sisal, and cotton, the book pairs scientific descriptions of each fiber and its potential uses with lists of dyes tested, alongside vivid fabric samples and undyed controls. Unlike leatherwork, which drew on existing expertise in Italy and its colonies, the Geigi book reveals broader ambitions for industrial-scale colonial extraction. Following Italy's 1935 invasion of Ethiopia, the League of Nations condemned the aggression and imposed sanctions, including arms embargoes, suspended loans, and a ban on imports. In response, Mussolini proclaimed economic autarky, urging industries, including textiles and fashion, to source materials from Italy and its African colonies. While textiles briefly benefited from colonial resources, the sector never rivaled its British or French counterparts. Crops from the colonies failed to produce sufficient quantities, leaving Italy dependent on imports, and the raw materials were of poor quality. The sample book highlights these limitations. The cotton, though spinnable, was of short fiber and best blended with American cotton. Other fibers yielded equally disappointing results. Taken together, the 3 artifacts I analyzed, the leopard fur ensemble, Nedima Dafa's silver brocade vest, and the Geigi sample book, reveal the layered colonial histories within Italy's former colonial museum and the entanglements of fashion with the geopolitics and economies of empire. They trace intersecting trajectories. Tripoli's Ottoman legacy of artisanal education, Italy's unrealized ambitions for colonial extraction, exemplified by Geigi, and the ecological and symbolic dimensions of empire condensed in the leopard coat, whose legacy persists in the enduring presence of the leopard motif within fashion design. In closing, I return to the museum, the site where these objects circulate today. Their reappearance, whether in storage in exhibitions like Monte di Pietà or in artistic research projects, underscores the crucial role of museums as custodians, recontextualizers, and decolonizers of colonial collections. These case studies show how object-based, provenance-driven research can disrupt canonical narratives and expose the unstable boundaries between craft, design, artisanship, and fashion, categories further unsettled by their entanglement with colonial projects. Engaging these artifacts not as passive relics of the past, but as active participants in the present, makes provenance research, identifying, tracing, contextualizing, a critical step towards reassessing museum narratives. In this sense, museums can become dynamic repositories where suppressed histories surface and knowledge is co-produced, opening the way toward a decolonized history of fashion, design, and cultural heritage. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We have just a few minutes for questions, and but we will have more time later in the afternoon to discuss in a deeper way the themes and topics we addressed this morning. I have one question for all of you, and all of you talked about and somehow different desires and different memories and also different actors that potentially met or will meet in the archives on the museum. And since the museum and archives are also spaces of friction and also of contacts, I would like to ask if in your work as a researchers and museologists, you have encountered or clashed with different stakeholders or actors with different desire, and how these have influenced your research work. And so that is the first question. We can collect other one. Okay, there. I don't know, il microfono? The microphone?
Thank you. Thanks for 3 very rich and interesting presentations. My question is actually also for all 3 of you, and kind of thinking about the larger themes of this conference. I was wondering if you have each individually thought about your own positionality in the work that you do and what it means to be non-African, white presenting people in this space. Thanks.
Yes, please.
Yes. Merci. Je vais intervenir sur un point qui a été abordé par notre ami sur le patrimoine culturel immatériel. Je pense que c'est un aspect assez crucial dans cette thématique concernant la restitution des biens, étant donné que la plupart du temps, on se focalise sur le patrimoine culturel matériel. Donc, la restitution des archives audiovisuelles, c'est quelque chose qui est quand même important. Je crois qu'il y a des pays qui sont engagés sur cette voie-là. Mais ce que je voulais demander par rapport à ce qu'on a vu, ça veut dire que c'est comment ce patrimoine immatériel qui appartient à une communauté et qui est plus ou moins valorisé par un individu, comment se fait la gestion des droits d'auteur? Puisqu'en réalité, s'il y a des retombées, qui en profitent? Est-ce que, par exemple, l'artiste que vous nous avez présenté, tout le mixage et ce qu'il fait avec ce patrimoine qui appartient à des communautés, il y a des retours pour cette communauté-là? Bien, c'est oui. Voilà, donc c'est un peu ça que je voulais avoir comme précision. Merci.
Merci. Et je voudrais poser une question à Rémi. C'est un peu dans la logique de la question de Jean-Paul. On sait par exemple que le musée de Tervuren a travaillé sur certaines données provenant de l'Institut des musées nationaux du Congo. Donc il y a eu des travaux qui avaient été faits dans les années 70 jusqu'à 80, 90, où l'Institut avait récolté près de 1000 heures d'enregistrement de musique. Et à un moment donné, le musée de Tervuren a utilisé certaines de ces données musicales pour les transcoder. Alors, il y a eu un problème par rapport aux communautés sources productrices de ces musiques traditionnelles. Et nous sommes en train de gérer des conflits où les gens exigent leurs droits d'auteur parce que ces musiques avaient été vendues. Il y avait, je ne sais pas si vous en êtes au courant et comment résoudre surtout les droits d'auteur en ce qui concerne les communautés locales. Alors, ma deuxième question s'adresse à Marion. Alors, j'ai vu, vous avez évoqué les restes humains, et notamment en ce qui concerne Lumumba. Et alors, il me semble que la question de les restes de Lumumba n'a pas été considérée de la même manière que les restes de la période coloniale. Parce que la démarche pour Lumumba a été une démarche purement politique qu'une démarche culturelle et aussi identitaire. Pourquoi? Et mémorial aussi, parce que la Commission nationale de la RDC a été créée en 2023, donc Commission nationale sur la restitution des biens culturels, restes humains et archives, a été créée en 2023, mais les restes de Lumumba sont arrivés bien avant, en 2022. Et ce sont des arrangements entre la famille de Lumumba et le gouvernement de la RDC ainsi que la Belgique, qui était en fait la suite de l'attitude du gouvernement belge dont le roi avait présenté les excuses par rapport à la situation de la colonisation. Est-ce que vous ne trouvez pas là aussi plus une récupération politique de cette restitution de restes humains que de poser de vrais problèmes déjà qui datent depuis l'époque coloniale?
Okay. So I'll give the room to the authors. We have just 2 minutes. Okay.
First, just to correct the translator, his name is Patrice Lumumba, not Mumba. Second, I would like to start with Monica. Thank you very much for your presentation. As you mentioned, there were quite a number of leopard skins that were extracted from the Italian colonies. Has there been any effort to help repopulate the leopard population in those colonies? Two, for Remy, thank you for recognizing that sharing is scaring. The digital space is really uncharted territory for us right now in terms of heritage and the archives. Third, for Marion, as you rightly said, there is a need for, and you are treating human remains with as much human dignity as possible. In modern day science, when we are going to use a human body for science, they have to have consented to their bodies being used for research. Who then is giving the consent for the human remains being used for scientific research, especially since they were taken a very long time ago? Thank you very much.
Any other question? No. Okay. Please.
Can I start?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe I will answer to all the question about friction, all the other question. First of all, I want to reply to Eva about my positionality. Of course, being a white guy, working for the Africa Museum, I have a very duty weight on my shoulder when I'm traveling and I'm not representing myself, first of all, I'm representing the whole colonization, even there from my institution. So it's really adds some weight in the unbalanced relationship that we can have, of course. But my idea is not to talk about poor people in the place. The idea is just to provide access in that really case. And of course, there's an idea now it comes when you want to build a new archive in all the narrative. What kind of music do we select? And then we have kind of friction. And I will continue maybe for the question of Jean-Paul. It was again. Could you? Okay. Sorry, I don't know my positionality. I don't remember the question, Jean-Paul. Could you repeat your question, please? No? Je vais d'abord répondre à Placide. Bon, bien évidemment, la question du droit d'auteur, elle est très très large. Et surtout quand on s'intéresse aux musiques dites de tradition orale, musiques traditionnelles, il y a très fortement une très large ambiguïté sur ce que sont les droits d'auteur et ce que sont aussi les droits voisins. Quand on parle d'archives sonores, on ne parle pas tellement des droits moraux qui sont liés aux droits d'auteur, on parle surtout des droits mécaniques, les droits voisins. Le fait que quelqu'un, un jour, a appuyé sur le bouton rouge et a fait un enregistrement. L'exemple que j'aime donner souvent, c'est si un jour maintenant vous prenez tous votre téléphone et vous prenez une photo de moi, je ne vous appartiens pas. Mais la photo vous appartient. Vous êtes en mesure de faire plus ou moins ce que vous voulez avec cette photo. Vous ne pouvez pas changer mon nom, vous ne pouvez pas dire que je suis plus bête que je ne suis, mais vous pouvez l'utiliser dans un contexte familial. Et c'est plus ou moins la même chose qui était en place ici dans le cadre des droits d'auteur. Bien évidemment, les droits moraux sont toujours respectés. Et dans le cas bien évidemment, il y a aussi encore un rapport totalement inégal dans la question de qui a créé ces lois. Les droits d'auteur proviennent de la Convention de Berne de la fin du 19e siècle, 1880 quelque chose, j'ai oublié la date précise. Et bien évidemment, l'idée c'est de protéger les inventeurs et puis les auteurs. Et on parle de certaines musiques, on parle surtout des compositeurs. Dans le cas des musiques traditionnelles qu'on gère, elles sont souvent reléguées au domaine public, ce qui ne plaît pas du tout aux communautés, sociétés, peuples. Mais alors l'idée maintenant, c'est de savoir si on fait de l'argent avec ça, surtout ça. Ben non. Et donc l'idée, c'est le droit mécanique. Enfin, penser qu'il y a de l'argent derrière, il faut qu'il y ait une vente. On ne paye pas pour la culture. C'est pas parce que j'ai un enregistrement qu'on va payer quelqu'un pour une culture. On paye s'il y a une vente. Alors bien évidemment, encore une fois, ce sont des... Aujourd'hui, il y a le colonialisme numérique, mais avant, il y avait aussi des relations totalement déséquilibrées. Le cas que Placide évoque, le musée de Tervuren a produit une dizaine de CD qui s'appelait Anthologie de la vie musicale du Congo, dans le cadre d'un programme de coopération de développement, de valorisation de tous effectivement, les enregistrements qui ont été faits au début des années 70 en collaboration avec le musée de Tervuren et l'Institut des musées nationaux du Congo. Il y avait énormément d'enregistrements, effectivement, ces 1000 heures de musique n'étaient pas valorisées. Il y avait l'idée de sortir un CD. Il y a 12 anthologies. Sur l'un de ces 12 anthologies, un musicien a réclamé des droits. Quand on appliquait les règles de division de droits d'auteur par rapport au fait qu'il soit interprète, par rapport au minutage et par rapport au nombre de ventes qui ont été faites de ces CD, donc ces CD sont produits à 3000 exemplaires, il y en a une centaine qui sont vendus. Ça ne me porte pas la musique traditionnelle, c'est pas très vendeur. L'artiste pouvait réclamer 38 €. Il en avait réclamé 200 000 dans un premier temps pour droits patrimoniaux, extra-patrimoniaux. Il y a un premier arrangement à l'amiable qui a essayé de se faire avec l'avocat de cette partie. Le musicien habite à Kinshasa et l'avocat était au barreau de Bruxelles. Et le directeur de l'époque a d'abord proposé 800 €, ce qui a beaucoup énervé l'avocat, qui a lancé une procédure en justice réclamant maintenant 400 000 €. Donc 40 €, 400 000 €, on est 10 000 fois plus élevé. Ce procès a duré 8 ans. Il a débouché sur... la personne n'a pas eu gain de cause. Il doit maintenant rembourser des frais d'avocat. Ça crée un contexte qui fragilise très très fort l'idée de vouloir partager les archives sonores. Parce qu'évidemment, il y a un passif maintenant. C'est pour cela que j'essaie d'inciter sur la question du droit d'auteur, que cette option d'œuvre orpheline est c'est pour nous une sécurité de pouvoir essayer de partager au maximum sans risquer un autre procès. C'était une espèce de, je ne sais pas si les traducteurs vont pouvoir traduire bien, mais de chat perché. On dit qu'on a enregistré cet enregistrement en attendant qu'un ayant droit se manifeste. Mais je vais terminer ma communication en montrant qu'il n'y a pas une solution idéale pour toutes les situations. Certaines communautés, sociétés, peuples veulent avoir leurs archives en ligne, c'est très important d'avoir un accès, d'autres ne veulent pas. Et donc, voilà, donc la question du droit d'auteur, avant tout, dans la gestion de ces archives sonores, la première réponse, le premier droit d'auteur, c'est les droits moraux, et donc le droit de paternité. Ça, c'est quelque chose qu'on ne peut pas enlever. Et c'est pour ça que dans cette question on a ce petit bricolage sur cette plateforme d'œuvres orphelines, de mettre le propriétaire, owners, la population. C'est pas grand-chose, mais au moins ça permet, dans l'absence des noms, et la plupart des enregistrements ont été faits dans ces années-là, on ne prenait pas le temps vraiment de noter les personnes qu'on enregistrait. Et parfois, c'est simplement pas possible. Enregistrer une... Je ne vais pas parler trop longtemps, ok. Ok. That was it, sorry. C'est pas forcément évident, mais effectivement, le premier droit, c'est de respecter les droits moraux dans ce contexte-là.
Thank you for all the different questions. I will start to answer by the question of my own positionality. I am not from Belgium, I am not from Congo, of course. And I think that in this field, one of the main thing that I try to keep is humility. There are some few things that I will never feel as a European, that I had never experienced as a French woman and not an African woman. So humility is one of the things that I try to keep in mind. Regarding museums as zones of conflicts and frictions, this is part of the project Remaniement to study. It is one of the core aspects to study those negotiations, be there frictions and conflicts. So it is really one of the key challenge. Thank you, Placid, for also pointing out the different cases regarding Patrice Lumumba and the political issues behind this repatriation that is, of course, different from other colonial collections. And that was not considered in the same way. But yeah, I think the political issues is at the core of all the repatriation, the way repatriation is dealt today in Belgium, and how it is now also lack of abandoned in a certain way. And last question regarding consent. This is, for me, it is really one of the key questions regarding the current pregnant research that are currently undertaken. Who can give access and give the possibility to conduct research or not when we don't know neither the identity of the people in the collections and nor the communities of origin. For me, it is at the core of how we do provenance research today, and it is really a question that I would like to open to the floor and not only to myself, because I think it is something to discuss all together. And thank you for raising this.
Now it's my turn. I start with Erika. Thank you for your question. So with this research in particular, I always said I'm interested in fashion. I somehow keep the colonial interests out of focus because I know that then I'm perceived as just like a person interested in aesthetics, so I concealed openly my research interest to gain access, sneaky as I am, which was mostly successful and gave me access to archives probably that wouldn't have granted me archives if I had declared my intentions in advance. I traveled to Basel to find the archives of the Geigy company. Basel is the big pharmaceutical city in Switzerland, and the Geigy archives are held in the archives of a big pharmaceutical company. I went to their archives, and there the archivist showed me a wall, a full room full of archival materials and full of these sample books. And she said to me, I suffer from vertigo. I can't reach the upper shelf of this archival shelf to give you access to the books. And then I said, well, isn't there anybody else? And she said, no, and they're also not really cataloged, so we don't know. What did I do? I spent 2 days sifting through other archival material from Geigy, from the company Milan that was established and hired by the Italian government, I suppose, to make these tests in the Italian colonies. But this was all under strict surveillance of the archivist, and I think they overloaded me with, I think, 20 archival folders, but they didn't want to give me access to the actual material that I traveled there for. I would consider this a kind of hidden conflict, a very Swiss diplomatic way of not giving access to, and I still, it's okay. I attempted what I could. Thank you, Caroline, also for the question about the repopulation of leopards. No, as far to my knowledge, there was no attempt by anybody in Italy to do this, also because there's a true amnesia regarding the colonial past in Italy, especially fashion's colonial past. I bet if we went to Fendi, the headquarters of a big furrier company who is in air close to Mr. Vigliani's Museo del Civiltà, I'm sure that there's lots of exotic skins in their archives, and they could be actually asked to contribute to these efforts. Thank you also to addressing the positionality, my own positionality in this research. My maternal grandfather fought in the Ethiopian War, and I discovered a family photo album, just like JC told a story that she discovered a photograph of her grandfather. I did so too. I see this more as my responsibility to address this shared history, which is mine just as much as an African history. So this is the positionality I bring into this kind of research, to readdress gaps and to add hidden chapters and to use my own privilege also in accessing these archives with this strategy of hiding and pretending to be looking just for like garments to do this kind of research. That's kind of my answer. But thank you for addressing it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We have to close. And okay, thank you to the authors and also to the public. It has been amazing. And I think there is the coffee break.
Yeah, at least just 10 minutes. So we kindly ask you to come back here in 10 minutes. Thank you.
So good morning once again. I'm Lana Karaya, the board member of ICOM Europe and chair of ICOM Georgia, and it's my pleasure to present this panel. So our conference explores heritage museums and collections with a focus of how professionals from Africa and Europe can share knowledge and skills in addressing both historical legacies and contemporary challenges. So this panel will continue the dialogue by reflecting on how museums are rethinking their collections and display in light of colonial histories and how new curatorial and participatory practices are shaping the ways we engage the heritage today. It's my pleasure to present the first speaker, Andrea Vigliani, who's a critic, curator, and historian of contemporary arts and culture. Since 2022, he has been the director of the Museo della Civiltà in Rome and one of Italy's most important national museums, which brings together diverse collections spanning from prehistory to early Middle Age, Italian folk arts, and non-European cultures, as well as archives of Italian colonial history. Before this role, he served as a head and curator of the Castello di Rivoli Research Center, director of Madre Museum in Naples, director of Fondazione Galleria Civica in Trento, and curator of the Mambo, Museum of Modern Art in Bologna. His curatorial experience also includes international projects such as the Biennial de Lyon and Documenta 13, where he co-curated the Afghan section. Alongside his institutional leadership, he has published widely and contributes regularly to scholarly and cultural journals. In his talk, Decolonizing a Museum Through Not Against Its Heritage, Historical Past, Critical Present and Hypothetical Future of the Museum of Civilizations, he will discuss how the museum is rethinking its collections and narratives in light of colonial histories. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome you on the stage, and the floor is yours. Yeah.
Okay, now a little bit of whatever. Hello, thank you so much for inviting me, ICOM and Professor Sericani. Thank you so much. So my talk will be bilingual. Sometimes I use English and sometimes my spaghetti English, and sometimes I will talk in Italian. I start in Italian, but I know that there are translations. Ho deciso di intitolare questa presentazione Decolonizzare il patrimonio non contro di esso, ma attraverso di esso, dopo che ho parlato con Ijaba Shego, scrittrice, pedagogista e attivista italiana, la cui famiglia è di origine somala. Ijaba ha dedicato recentemente un capitolo di un suo romanzo intitolato Cassandra a Mogadiscio al Museo delle Civiltà, e questo capitolo si intitola, è proprio all'interno, nel cuore del romanzo, Intermezzo decoloniale, ed è dedicato al Museo delle Civiltà, che di fatto è un'istituzione che sta vivendo un intermezzo istituzionale, storico, metodologico, etico. Il Museo delle Civiltà, e non mi dilungherò su questo perché domani saremo insieme e vi ringrazio per visitarlo dalle 10 alle 13, è il Museo Nazionale Italiano dedicato a 6 differenti precedenti musei che sono stati in differenti epoche aperti e in differenti epoche chiusi. Tra questi 6 musei c'è, il citato prima, e ringrazio la collega, ex Museo Coloniale di Roma, istituito da Benito Mussolini nel 1923 come Museo delle Colonie e questa data è altrettanto importante rispetto a quella della sua istituzione, chiuso nel 1971, all'inizio degli anni 70, e, come dicevo prima ad alcuni di voi, disperso. I grandi quadri delle cosiddette guerre coloniali sono visibili alla Galleria Nazionale d'Arte Moderna, gli animali tassidermizzati all'Ecoparco di Roma, i documenti preziosissimi per un museo coloniale sono qui alla Biblioteca Nazionale Centrale. Ciò che resta, e non è poco, è stato chiuso accuratamente in alcune casse e dimenticato per molti aspetti per oltre 50 anni. Il Museo delle Civiltà ha ricevuto queste casse senza gli archivi e senza le altre cose che vi ho detto nel 2017. Siamo nel 2025, abbiamo ottenuto i fondi per la riesposizione di queste opere, manufatti, testimonianze, e dovremmo essere quasi arrivati al punto di poter dire che stiamo per riaprire. Cosa faremo? Riapriremo un nuovo museo coloniale o apriremo qualcosa che non è più né coloniale né museo? Ecco perché voglio citare ciò che ci disse Ijaba Shego nel visitarci. Andando nei depositi, che sono in assenza di una collezione visibile il luogo più attivo e più critico per un museo, Ijaba ha avuto un incontro abbastanza scioccante. Ha visto un dipinto di epoca coloniale, chiaramente con una matrice esotizzante, in cui una donna somala pettina i suoi capelli con una spazzola, un pettine tradizionale somalo. E ha visto, nei cassetti del deposito, che c'erano alcuni esempi di questo pettine, di questa spazzola. Questo pettine e questa spazzola sono quelli che in genere in Somalia venivano usate dalle madri per pettinare le figlie, anche per pettinare le figlie. E usando quel momento di relativa calma in cui una bambina, avendo i suoi capelli in un pettine, sta un po' più tranquilla, le madri potevano raccontare alle figlie le storie della famiglia, le storie dei loro ancestors, le storie della loro cultura, della loro comunità, trasmettendo in modo orale da una madre ad una figlia ciò che identificava loro come madre e come figlia, loro come famiglia, loro come membri di una comunità. Perché Hijab è rimasta scioccata? Perché quel pettine e quella spazzola nella Somalia di oggi non le usano più le madri e i figli, e perché nelle comunità diasporiche somale non vengono più usati quei pettini. Questa tradizione rischia di estinguersi per le culture che l'hanno creata, e dove è rimasta testimonianza di questo aspetto, se volete, così piccolo, così umile, così intimo di una grande cultura? Nei depositi di un museo coloniale chiuso. Fuori dalle famiglie, fuori dalle comunità, fuori dalla memoria e dalla possibilità di trasmissione. Ecco perché ringrazio Hijab, che probabilmente, forse, sarà con noi domani. Ringrazio Hijab per aver ispirato questa sensazione, prima ancora di questa idea, di poter lavorare, di dover lavorare su un patrimonio come questo, non contro di esso, ma attraverso di esso. E addirittura, mi scuseranno tutte le antropologhe, tutti gli archeologi, tutte le storiche dell'arte e gli storici dell'arte qui presenti, ma addirittura mi verrebbe da dire verso queste collezioni. Through, towards, not against. And towards means that we need to go there, even if we are the custodians of these collections. For the very first time, I switched to English. For the very first time in my career as a museum director or curator, I know that I work, and I know since the beginning, when I applied for this position, to work in an unsafe environment, or as I wrote, in an alien territory. And while I think that all the museums should be at least a bit unsafe, this is very specific in the case of Museum of Civilizations, because this museum is built on historical contradictions and in future potentialities. The very first contradiction is his name, a contemporary anthropological museum devoted to war cultures, using a very, very, very Latin term, like civilization, which means the culture of the citizens and of the city. And we know that many of the indigenous cultures that we are devoted to don't have the same concept of culture as something related to a city. So there are, as I have very few minutes more, there are some assumptions and premises that I would like to share with you. My idea is that we still don't know, in a museum like that, what we made, what we stole, what we wrote about, what we shown, what we preserve and study. Oh, by the way, you are going to see everything tomorrow. Edouard, yeah. Thank you. Maybe I show just that. That's why I think that we should work in a museum like the Museum of Civilization through or even towards these collections. We need to test the ground that they shape in order to find a language and a working method. I know that museums should know what they do, but in this case it could be better if they question themselves about what they do. We deal with methodological and hermeneutic ignorance, as well as, if not more than, with historical violence. We deal with subjects, first of all, not objects. We deal with obliterated ghosts, spirits, forces, broken taboos, much more than with just stolen forms and materials. They are the result of a massively destructive and at the same time self-destructive history. And as Mati Diop demonstrated to us in the amazing Dahomey film, these subjects that we manage, they are alien now to the original makers, to the modern appropriators, to their present and or future back home interpreters and custodians. We deal with still alive, not extinct civilizations. And I assure you that many visitors think that visiting the African, American, Pacific Islands or Asian collection mean going to visit cultures that are archaeological, extinct, not alive anymore. And that's why, because I needed to defend this position so many times on the national press, that's why contemporariness, not contemporary art, I'm a contemporary historian, contemporariness of the highest quality is not a footnote, is not a pretension, but is a mandatory methodological and hermeneutic tool to not further misinterpret these collections. So we need to work beyond divisions that are quite stereotypical. Also, in a country like Italy, where this kind of debate is recent, more recent than in other countries, we need to work beyond the divisions between art and anthropology. We need to imply not just the past, but the present economics and politics in looking at this collection. And I thank an artist that I also quoted, Sami Balogi, who is one of the research fellows at the museum. We need to work beyond the division between nature and culture, between history and ecology, because the history of indigenous culture is also the history of the climate change and the destruction of the environment. It's not just against cultures that we perpetrated violence, but it's also against the forest, the fields, the winds, the water. And I need to thank Maria Teresa Alves, who is going to install her own piece in the middle of the rehanging of the American collection, and is about the destruction of the place that we call now Mexico City. We need to work against the division between architectures and forest, or archaeology and the contemporary archaeology that I propose to label digitalogy. We need to share practices, and we need a mutual understanding that is not just intellectual, is physical and sensible. That's why, and I thank the many reserve fellows helping us, we need form of even of healing, like working in an hospital and not in a cultural institution. We need to stop, sorry, this is a little bit politically incorrect, but we need to stop to just talk about property, because there are too many cases of restitutions that are made unilaterally as when these subjects are being stolen. There are many cases that I could refer, but I don't have time. So, to make a long story short, we need to celebrate, possibly, a matrimonio, which means a plural care, rather than a patrimonio, which means singular ownership in this kind of museum. So heritage is like prehistory, oriental, ethnography, a word that we are trying not to use anymore. And much of the work that we are doing now at the museum is to change the lexicon, change the grammar, change the language, in particular being a museum with this name, Civilizations, which is okay. I cannot change the name of the museum. I can question. Okay. So the restitution is a reparation and not just a transfer of ownership. Restitution is not the end, but is a further beginning. And I would like to thank Clementine Delis, was Metabolic Museum, Future Academy, are of course a terrain vague mark more than a landmark reference, but in particular I would like to thank Dan Nixon, Professor of Contemporary Archaeology at the School of Archaeology at Oxford University and Curator of World Archaeology at the Pitt Rivers Museum, for asking us to think about restitutions not as an end, but as a new beginning in this context. We face the responsibility of supporting entangled narratives and to support hypothetical platforms, to be redesigned beyond the museum's stereotypical schemes, platforms generated by a new generation of institutional stories-tellers rather than storytellers, that groups directors, curators, artists, activists, citizens, as well as many and much welcome in this kind of post-museum entity, animal, mineral, vegetable, as well as spiritual agents. So we need to open the windows, open the door, open the archives, welcome people like you, and working together without being afraid of the possible results, because the museum that result is maybe not anymore a museum. And I conclude saying that what we don't need anymore, and you know, people working in this kind of museums know what I mean. What we don't need anymore, and I thank again another external helper, Alessandra Ferrini, one of the contemporary Italian artists who's most committed to study the past, but as well as the contemporary Italian colonial story. What we don't need anymore in this context is good intentions. So no more good intentions, but stories told and actions shared in full. This means that I'm not pro any kind of cancel culture, any kind of wokenism, any kind of exaggeration, but I'm so pro about how terribly complex and terribly urgent is what we are doing now in one of the most beautiful contemporary museums, which is the Contemporary Anthropological Museum. And I need to thank this guy, Edouard Glissant, because Edouard Glissant, you know very well who Edouard Glissant is, inspired the name of the first attempt to not reopen a new colonial museum, because it was part of the, in 1959, of the first Congress, second Congress, World Congress of Writers and Artists, Black writers and artists, organized by the Istituto Italiano per l'Africa, which was the heir of the colonial collections in 1959, and he wrote that every man and every woman has the right, they have the right to be opaque, to be not transparent, to be more than something tiny and easily to understand. He wrote that we don't need to have an identity that is accepted. We need to self-define our identity, and our identity is complex. So we decided to label what we are doing with the colonial collection that we are going to visit it tomorrow, Museum of Opacities, which means two things, that these stories are opaque, complex, layered, there is no safe position, and that these stories are the result of a massive amnesia about Italian colonial history, because we cannot tell these stories without a museum, but the museum was closed for 50 years. And now ask young people, they don't know even that Italy was a colonial power. They don't know nothing about that in schools. So we need to work on a public opinion which is not aware of what we are discussing. As a public institution, we need to build an audience for this collection even before then reinstalling properly this collection. That's something that I should not say, but is a candidate for the biggest restitution after the Obelisco di Aksum. It's two paintings coming from the Addis Ababa Parliament. They are there in historic photographs here at the Biblioteca, but they are now in the collection of the Museum of Civilization, because in 1956 we didn't find them, so we didn't restitute. We restitute the others, but not these two ones. Of course, it's not the museum deciding what to restitute, but the museum is preparing the papers, conducting the research, and sharing the possible future for this collection, that maybe will not be anymore here in Italy, but they will go back to the Parliament of Addis Ababa. And it's not an end, it's a new beginning. As is a new beginning to receive 200,000 euros for our government, and I'm really grateful to, for buying a piece by Tio Eshetu, an Italo-Ethiopian artist who actually tells the stories of the restitution of the Obelisco di Aksum, using the same visual grammar of typical Ethiopian traditional art. So, if one day this painting will go back to Ethiopia, we will have anyway this story told in the museum. So sharing means that it's not property, it's not where the piece is located, is to have the same story to tell in two different, for example, institutions. It is too long. It's too long, but you see tomorrow. Okay, this is an amazing thing that you are not seeing tomorrow, because there is an entire part of the future Museum of Opacities which is devoted to whiteness and to archaeology. Because as you know, when we invaded our colonies in Africa, we said, we are not invading, we are going back home because of the Roman Empire. And this lady, without a head and without the arms, is the symbol of this story, is the Venere of Cyrene. Venere of Cyrene was the symbol that we are not going to invade, we are going back home, because Venus from Cyrene, from the Roman Empire. The original has been restituted by Silvio Berlusconi to Muammar Gheddafi and has been, I don't know if destroyed, but is missing. This is the chalk replica that Benito Mussolini wanted at the beginning of the Colonial Museum, and is still at the Museum of Civilization, which means that copies, replicas, avatars, digital, and co-ownership is maybe an exit strategy, and it already was. Too long to explain? Well, this is about ecology and economy, which is a massive part of the collection, which is not about art, it's about how profitable was to have a colonial empire. Too long. Again, ciao. Oh, this is a beautiful project that most unfortunately you will not see tomorrow. It's called the Phono Museum Rome, and is about the Afro-descendenti communities in Italy that they are building their own museum inside of the colonial collections, telling stories about what coloniality, which means not historical colonialism, but the persistence of colonialism, means today for them. So something that it's contemporary, is not historical, and this is one of the most important strategies in Museum of Opacities. Contemporariness is opening the door of the past museums to current contemporary people, in particular people that are from communities silenced, marginalized, obliterated, fully absent from the historical colonial museums. But they were Ethiopia, Somali, Libici. So why they were not there? We know why, but why should not be there now? So an ongoing coloniality museum. Too long, but it's something that we will see tomorrow. The second chapter of Museum of Opacity, because it's a story in many chapters, it's about agriculture and about infrastructure, the end of the end. Okay, so it's the end, indeed. And tomorrow we will see the pieces by Germain Michael Gabriel and the flag with blood of Generale Graziani. We will see the Ente di Decolonizzazione related to the Ente del Latifondo by Dar, and I salute Alessandro and Sandy, who are now in Palestine, because Sandy is Palestinian. Okay, that's something that I will tell tomorrow, but we are giving a prize for the colonial practices. And this is cooking sections, which is about colonial seeds. Every seed here is a colonial seed, and we consider this the analog of a ballet, because these seeds were really transforming in a dramatic way the landscape and the communities in Somalia, in this case. Thank you so much, and we will see, and we will discuss more about tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to ask the technical staff if Maria Figueira is online, because she's not here and she will present online. Can we check this? Oh, okay, great.
Hello.
Okay, the second speaker in this panel is Maria Figueira from Portugal. She is a PhD candidate in history and philosophy of science with a specialization in museology at the University of Évora, Portugal. She is a researcher on the project TransNat, Transnational Materialities, Reconstituting Collections and Connecting Histories. Her work examines how colonial collections were constructed, circulated, and interpreted in Portuguese museums, with a particular focus on provenance research and the enduring impact of colonial epistemologies on museum practice. She has also collaborated on curatorial projects, including the exhibition Facing the Colonial Legacy in the Museum, which explores these themes through innovative participatory approach. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I trust that you hear me well.
We can see you, but not your presentation. Okay, perfect. Yeah, everything is okay.
I will start. So, Andrea Villani for the presentation just before. I also apologize for being there, and but it was really not possible. This presentation to share with you.
There is a problem with the voice.
It's an intervention on now room of Santos Museum in Figueira da Foz, Portugal, and I'm going to talk to you about that and about the behind it. So how we came to that. So as it was said, I the project was which is also the curator of this so I will start by talking about the project smart, but before going to that, I also to state
Maria,
our point
can you hear us?
within the context of the project.
Can you hear me?
These things that are
No, we have the problem.
Museums in Portugal, museums from the 19th century, but we look at the meaning as objects, right? Objects from collections, so scientific objects. And although this may seem like a very exclusive, it at the time
We can't hear your voice, so can you hear us? There is a problem. I think when she turned into the full screen, it started. Yeah, maybe you will try now. No, maybe it's about the headphones. Maybe this is about the headphones. Maybe you will use it. If she can speak without headphones. Oh, we can't hear you. No voice. No voice. Is it Zoom or what is it? The problem is from home. Yeah.
Maria, could you take off the headphones? Because maybe the problem is the microphone of the headphones.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay, let's check now with the presentation.
Okay, apologies, I couldn't understand that there was a... Okay, let's check now.
Could you restart the presentation because we haven't heard nothing about that? Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, now I think it's okay.
Everything is good now?
No, yeah, thank you.
Yes, apologies, yes, okay, so I'm going to start. Once again, I'm sorry for not being there in person, and thank you so much to the organization and to Andrea Vigliani that preceded me for a very, very interesting presentation. So I want to share with you today 2 points. One is to talk to you about this exhibition, or better said, intervention in the ethnography room of the Municipal Museum of Figueira da Foz in Portugal, which is ongoing until the end of October, and to talk to you about the project that preceded this intervention. So, as it was said, I worked as a researcher with a scholarship in the project and was part of the curatorial team of this intervention that was coordinated by Elizabeth Pereira. So starting in this project, the Transmat project, I want to also start by saying, to talk about our point of departure, so how we looked at these things. I'm going to say things under commas that are in the ethnographic sections or collections of archaeology museums in Portugal, museums from the 19th century. This is what we looked in the project. So within this context of the history of the archaeology museum, these things that have many meanings and many names that we not normally don't know from what is in the museum archive. They are objects, and they are scientific objects. So as we looked at these things as collections, as scientific objects, which may be exclusive, it also builds on to understand how knowledge production is made around these collections and in the history of the museums, and to understand what collections are. Also, I want to situate situate a little bit our context, the research started in the end of 2020. This is a time, 1 year later, the ICOM Portugal publishes a report where they inquire museums about extra European collections. So if they had them, what they had, what was their characteristics. And many couldn't respond if they had or not, they didn't know, and they couldn't also characterize these collections. So this report from 2021 was showing that there's a huge lack of knowledge about collections, namely collections of colonial provenance in Portuguese museums. So this is our background when we are starting. And I share with you our website and some of the questions we started departing. So this project comes from a methodology and also a framework from the history of science, and it's a project from the University of Évora. Yes, that was looking at, as I said, archaeology museums from the 19th centuries and their collections, the collections. The ethnographic collections. We specifically look at two museums, the National Archaeology Museum in Lisbon, that was founded in 1893 by Leite de Vasconcelos, and this municipal museum, the Santos Rocha Municipal Museum, founded in 1894 by António dos Santos Rocha, in the city of Figueira da Foz. So, and we were looking, so we wanted to understand then how these collections came to be, how did they end up in Portugal, when were they brought and by whom, who were they, why were they displaced from their place of origin, what role did they play in the museum collection at different stages, and what values or meanings have been assigned to them over time. So we are looking at the history within the museum. So today, these collections in the Santos Rocha Municipal Museum are held in the visitable storage, which is open since 2014. The image you can see on your left, and the exhibition room, the ethnography room, which until recently was what you can see on your right. So in the context of the project, and here are some of the results already of the provenance research we did. So we look at this, what Anna Turner calls the institutional bureaucracy, with the archives from the museum, but also newspapers, scientific magazines, and a lot related with colonial history. And we use the object biography also in our methodology. So some of the results, which is what I wanted to show you here. So to understand better what this collection is in both museums, and I would call attention for the graphic on the left side, which has you see these columns in two colors. The orange is the Municipal Museum of Santos Rocha in Figueira da Foz, and the green the National Museum. So the first thing that we understood is that this is a collection that is relatively small between the two museums. We are talking about 2,000 objects. So it was something that it was also that we were comfortable to look at more with more extent. And that surprisingly for us, the Municipal Museum has a larger collection. It had about 1,400 objects, while the National Museum had 6,000. This majority of the objects are of African came from Africa and were namely from Angola and Mozambique, and it was followed in the Municipal Museum by Timor. It was the third biggest provenance of objects, and then Brazil. And why is that so? Obviously, we are looking at collections that are built in the end of the 19th century, in the beginning of the 20th century, and these were previously colonized territories by Portugal. And then when we started to look even further in the years of incorporation of these objects, we see that they correspond with military campaigns that were done in these territories. So this was it was very evident, these relationships. In the matters of Brazil, it's also because particularly Figueira da Foz, the port was dealing with commerce with Brazil, and through these relationships, there was also a lot of objects coming. Yes, so on the graphic on the right, you can see I highlighted two years. 2 years specifically, because this is related to what we were showing that was being displayed in the ethnographic room. So what we also, which I will actually go back more to the front of the presentation. So besides looking at the collection in this general matters, so where are the objects mainly, where did they come from, when did they get in the museum, we were looking at this history, the history of the museum. And one thing that was very important, of course, is this the scientific paradigm that is underlying this ethnographic collection building, which is related with this methodology used in the archaeology of the 19th century in Europe, this comparison methodology that used a racialized and evolutionist perspective on culture and mankind. Santos Rocha, this is the pictures from the Municipal Museum in different points. The first picture on the left shows us the museum in the end, in exactly the first years, in the end of the 19th century. And the second picture shows it how it went afterwards, how it mutated from the first image until around the 50s. It stayed like that. And Santos Rocha, the founder of the museum, which is integrated in this scientific paradigm in Europe in the end of the 19th century, and from which he takes a lot of reference from Italian archaeology, Luigi Pigorini. So he's invested in building this museum in this with these configurations that we see. Then upon his death in 1910, the museum that went some modifications, and in the 40s they come with a new program renaming this room from the comparison room to the ethnography room. And in this stage, they separated the archaeology collections that in beginning were together with the ethnographic collections to another part of the museum, but maintain exactly the same structure of exposition and of classification of the objects exposed. Yes, okay, so I will keep going. So so I've been showing you a bit how we have undergoing the work. We do this provenance research to understand the overall of collection. We did this look into the scientific paradigms that are in the base of also the collection, and then as well, so certain contexts that appear very relevant and that are related with those years that I highlighted in the graphics. And in this image, you see three portraits. The first one on top on the left is of the founder of the museum, Santos Rocha. The one on the right to him, it's a photography of his scientific network in Portugal, and the scientific society founded the Archaeology Society at work. And on the bottom is a relative of him, a military and colonial administrator called João dos Santos Pereira Jardim, that was also a member of the scientific society founded. He was at some point as well administrator of the port, the maritime port of Figueira da Foz, and it's the biggest collector is the biggest collector in this collection. We looked as well at who is making this collection, and it's people mainly related with the founder, Santos Rocha, and they participate in the cycles he relates to political, commercial, and familiar, scientific, And this military, that you see in the bottom, João dos Santos Pereira Jardim, he's responsible for the incorporation of 260 objects, about 200 from Timor and 60 from Angola, which is what we actually see in display today in the ethnography room of the museum without this information. So this has been absent in the discourse of the museum of how the collection is made, right? And so another layer that we work on is so how did he acquire these collections? And the collection from Angola is the result of a plunder, the theft of all these 60 objects that are sacred entities, amongst other things. Some of which it's the ones you can see here on the right. And they are the product of a punitive military expedition that he led in the north of Angola in 1902 for revenge. This is what he says in his own words, to revenge the resistance of the local populations in acquiring that are refusing to participate in this exploitation of materials, namely timber, for the Portuguese. So this is, and I also have here on the further left this map of Angola, which is the representation of the military Portuguese. It's a political representation, so of course all these entanglements are part of collection making of what collections are, but are often absent of the museum discourse when we visit the museum and when we visited this ethnography room. So it is in this context that this intervention comes in the end of the project, which was a bit complicated. The project, which was funded by the Scientific and Technology Foundation of Portugal, one of the requirements is in the end to make an exhibition. And we were working and planning on something. We had a project that 1 month before we opened couldn't follow through for a lot of questions, and we had to adapt. We worked very closely with the designer and architect that then came up with a device that consolidated our concerns, which is, and also work with the restrictions we were given. Something that was very important is what you see here in the first image on the left, which is the poster of the exhibition, which is a composition of these labels. Some were the original, and the labels through the years in the museum regarding this collection. And what we see there is how they, of course, reproduce the same things. So they reflect this kind of order the museum gives, right? And the ways it catalogs these collections and how it perpetuates the same narrative that is built in the 19th century in the beginning, and that is also inscribed in this very particular scientific paradigm. Right.
Maria, apologize to interrupt you, just 2 minutes left, sorry.
Right, I'm coming to the end. So we include in the exhibition all this information about the research, but mainly our main focus was to interact and to engage with the visitors. These photos I show you here are from the end of June. So and when it opened the exhibition, it seemed like nothing had been done because we only had used the glass of this of where the objects are within. So we didn't change. We used the ethnography room as a document, as the museography that was present present as a document that that we interact with on the glass panels. So we introduce our parts of our research, and then we invite the public to intervene. And then this is what is very interesting, because the visitors, the visitors precisely work, talk about this. They start to question, okay, who do this? There's a lot of the question of ownership being called to. So how can museums own things that were stolen? We don't understand what these things are. What are their original names? And why is the history of why is this history of Portugal a violent history of land and resources dispossession has been absent so far? So it allows us to have an engagement space, a space of engagement with the visitors and with the schools. So today, so these pictures, as I said, they are from the end of June. Today, this is even more full. So there's places we can no longer see also the collection. And the first thing, remember, the name of this intervention is Facing the Colonial Legacy in the Museum. And it's precisely this confluation of the past and the present, and these entanglements of knowledge production in the museum. And today, in many spaces, you can no longer see the objects. You see the visitor's critique, and it has become very interesting. Thank you, and apologies for the first parts.
Thank you very much. It's okay. Thank you. I would like to thank both speakers and apologize for interrupting, but we are really behind our timeline. So we have just a minute to pick up the questions one-to-one for each speaker. So if there is any questions, the floor is open for the discussion. And we will have a final discussion where all the speakers will be invited. No questions? Okay, so we will visit your museum, Andrea, tomorrow, and we will have the time also to discuss and open, which we could not do today. So I'm looking at Juliana. I know that we should finish this panel. I would like to thank once again. Yeah, do you want to say anything? I would like to thank and applaud both speakers. Thank you very much, and we will see each other. Maria, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ciao.
Buongiorno a tutti. Hello, everybody. This panel is the panel related with heritage museums collections, the community's role. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Mário Antes. I come from Portugal. I'm ICOM Europe board member and also work in National Museum of Ancient Art in Lisbon and also teach in Lusófona University in Lisbon, more exactly in the Department of Museology in Cátedra UNESCO of Education and Museums. Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate all the organization, especially ICOM Europe, ICOM Italy and ICOM Africa, Arab, and all the other committees, because it's not easy to bring together professionals around the world. We have in this room museums professionals from several continents, not only Europe, but also Africa, and we have one colleague from Australia also. So it's very good to have and to bring all the people together, because we have the same problems, we share the same difficulties, and of course we are here to learn from each other and from our experiences as well. So when we talk about this panel, Heritage Museums and Collections, we think how there are several questions on our mind related with communities. How can communities participate? Should communities co-curate our exhibitions? Should or would communities have a key role in our museums? We believe so. And this panel is about that. We have 3 colleagues. One is here, the other are online. 3 different experiences from Senegal, from Cote d'Ivoire, and from Somalia to share with us, because museums have no borders, and we are here because we truly believe that we are building a better world through our museums, and we have to go out of our box, think outside the box, and try to figure how us as museums professionals could challenge the world and give voice to the communities, because as museum professionals we are also members of these communities. So without further delays, I'm going to present our first colleague, Mustafa Dia. He comes from Senegal, and he's going to speak about the role of the communities in development of the anti-colonial museums in Africa. Mustafa Dia is a heritage manager at Theodore Mondou Museum in Africa, in Dakar, in Senegal, and also a doctoral research at Ethnos Doctoral School. And he has a thesis related with space, society, culture. Also, we have a master's degree in history, prehistory, archaeology, and medieval history, and a professional master in arts and cultures. So he has a long experience. He was a scholarship of French government for his doctoral research internship at University of Paris 8, and also participate in different international programs, such as British Academy International Writing Workshop, and is treasurer of ICOM Senegal since 2024, and also member of ICOM Sustain. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Je remercie comme Europe, Guyana et toute l'équipe pour l'organisation. J'en profite aussi pour remercier ICOM Sustain, Comité sur le développement durable, qui m'a demandé de représenter aussi à travers cette communication. Je les rends hommage aussi. Aujourd'hui, je vais parler du développement des musées communautaires en Afrique. Quel est leur rôle? Parce que, comme vous le savez très bien, en Afrique, le musée est entré en Afrique avec la colonisation. Le musée moderne, parce que, comme l'a dit ici Babacar Klelerowad, les premiers musées de type européen ont été implantés dans les centres de rayonnement de la colonisation, comme les écoles et l'église. Les écoles et l'église se sont bien acclimatées en Afrique, alors que le musée, jusqu'à présent, a du mal à prendre sa place dans la société africaine. Et là, pour cela, il faut comprendre l'utilité des objets. Parce que les objets, c'était des objets fonctionnels qui utilisés dans la société. Et là-bas, en première étape, on a la fabrication de l'objet et l'utilisation. Et ces objets, c'était des objets de société qui étaient utilisés pour la communication, pour des cérémonies, aussi des objets fonctionnels qui étaient utilisés pour décorer des maisons. Et avec la colonisation, ces objets ont été arrachés et ont intégré des musées. Et cette fossilisation des objets et le contexte même de collecte des objets était un tout petit peu paradoxal, parce que l'objet était arraché et au musée Théodore Monod, on s'est rendu compte que la plupart des objets qui sont là-bas, c'est des objets qui ont des informations lacunaires. On n'a que des objets sommaires. Ça ne donne pas la société, comment ces objets étaient conçus, comment ils étaient utilisés dans la société et quelle importance ils avaient, parce que c'est des objets identitaires. Et au Sénégal, les premiers musées ont été développés au Sénégal, à Dakar, en tant que capitale de l'Afrique occidentale française. Ensuite, ici, on a le musée Théodore Monod, qui a été créé en 1936. Avant, c'était l'Institut français d'Afrique noire, qui était chargé de fédérer tout ce qui était recherche sur l'Afrique, un institut pluridisciplinaire. Et à la suite, à partir de 1961, c'est devenu un musée ethnographique. Et là-bas, nous avons ici tous ces musées qui ont été créés à partir de cette période-là. C'est des musées qui ont été implantés dans les bâtiments coloniaux. Et à partir de ça, on peut voir qu'il y a une barrière, parce que c'est des bâtiments identitaires qui montrent la présence, c'est le spectre aussi du colonisateur. Ces bâtiments ont été recyclés et transformés en musée. Et à partir de 1966, il y a Senghor qui vient, il veut fédérer l'Afrique, une renaissance culturelle de l'Afrique avec l'organisation du Festival mondial des arts nègres. Et là, il a cette volonté de montrer que l'Afrique a une culture qui est vivante. Parce que dans les musées européens, là, on a des objets qui sont statiques, des objets qu'on peut considérer comme des objets morts. Et là, pour montrer la survivance et aussi la continuité de l'art africain, il a créé le Festival mondial des arts nègres. Et à partir de cette période-là, il a construit le musée dynamique, un musée moderne dont l'architecture est inspirée aussi de la culture européenne avec les temples gréco-romains. Et ici, on a la maison des esclaves à Gorée aussi. Et après, en 1975, il a créé le musée régional de Thiès aussi. Et dans ce musée aussi, c'est une fortification militaire qui a été recyclée aussi et transformée en musée. Et tout ça, à la longue, on s'est rendu compte que les populations sénégalaises ne fréquentent pas les musées. C'est toujours les touristes, parce qu'ici, on a l'exposition du musée de Dakar en 1945, un visiteur étranger. Et ici, on a une exposition au musée Théodore Monod en 2018. Toujours, c'est les touristes. Où est le public sénégalais? Et ça nous pousse à aussi pousser la réflexion.
Si vous voulez parler à côté.
OK, merci beaucoup. Et aussi, ça nous pousse aussi à pousser la réflexion. Et là, il y a une politique qui a été développée au niveau local. Et toujours, c'est le recyclage aussi de bâtiments coloniaux qu'on transforme en musées régionaux. Ici, on a le fort de Podor, fort de Bakel, tout ça, qui sont aussi des sites et des monuments hérités de la colonisation. Pourquoi créer des musées communautaires en Afrique? Parce que là, on a des musées qui sont implantés en Afrique. On parle de musées en Afrique. Et ici, il nous faut avoir des musées africains, des musées qui vont mieux refléter la culture africaine. Et là, on part de quelques citations ici. Il y a Aimé Césaire qui disait que le musée en lui-même n'est rien. Et aussi, il y a un chercheur sénégalais, Abdoulaye Sokhna Diop, qui dit que le musée demeure un corps étranger à la population dans les villes où il est installé. Et ensuite, il y a aussi Stanislas Arodevi qui disait aussi un musée en soi n'a rien. En soi, le musée ne veut rien dire. Et aussi, il y a aussi Alpha Omar Konaré, en 1983, qui disait qu'il faut tuer le modèle occidental des musées africains pour que s'épanouissent de nouveaux modes de conservation et de promotion du patrimoine. Et enfin, il y a Joseph Kizerbo qui dit qu'on ne peut pas se développer en dormant sur la natte des autres. Et le musée en soi représente en Afrique, on peut dire, une natte de l'autre. On essaie de valoriser notre propre patrimoine à travers des stratégies de conservation qui isolent le musée de la société. Parce que l'art en Afrique, c'est quelque chose de vivant. C'est quelque chose qui permet aussi à la population de pouvoir se communier avec l'esprit des ancêtres, de montrer sa diversité et sa richesse aussi. Et à partir de là, on a fait, à partir de nos études aussi, des enquêtes et aussi des analyses, et on s'est rendu compte qu'il y a des formes de résistance, de musées qui ont été créés comme des formes de résistance à la modernité. Là, on a des ethnies au Sénégal, on a les Diola qui se trouvent au nord, les Bassari, les Bédik, la culture est quelque chose de vivant et elle se transmet de génération en génération. Et là, on a des lieux qui sont aménagés comme des musées de sites et des musées en plein air où ces objets sont conservés et valorisés. Et ces musées sont aussi associés à des pratiques rituelles, culturelles qui se passent tous les années. Et ici, par exemple, en bas, on a en Casamance les fromagers. C'est des arbres emblématiques. Les objets qui sont hors usage, qu'on n'utilise plus dans la société, on les dépose sur les pieds de l'arbre. Et ça, à la longue, ça a permis aussi de collecter pas mal d'objets. Et il y a une initiative locale. Et les jeunes du village ont transformé ces pieds des fromagers en musée. Et là, on a le musée Kadout. Et là-bas, au fond, on a la culture Lebou. C'est une culture basée sur la tradition immatérielle. Il y a les esprits, la réincarnation des esprits à travers les libations, des cérémonies folkloriques et aussi qui permet aussi de montrer notre attachement à la culture et surtout la survivance de la culture face à la modernité. Et ici, on a le cancouan qu'on trouve au Sénégal, dans la partie sud aussi à Mbour. Et ça aussi, c'est des pratiques qui montrent que la communauté essaie de mettre en place des dispositifs qui peuvent concurrencer les musées modernes. Parce que pourquoi? Les musées sont isolés et l'État, la plupart des musées sont gérés par l'État et par les universités. Les communautés ne se retrouvent pas dans les musées, mais aussi ils ne tirent pas profit des retombées qui viennent des entrées des musées. Et là, à travers le tourisme, on essaie de valoriser le patrimoine local et aussi de participer au développement de la localité. Et pourquoi en Casamance, par exemple, on avait les bois sacrés. Et jusqu'à présent, on a les bois sacrés. C'est des lieux culturels aménagés et protégés avec des dispositifs culturels. Il y a des boucliers. Personne ne doit entrer sans l'autorisation des chefs. Et aussi, seuls les initiés aussi peuvent entrer dans le bois sacré pour connaître les secrets. Et aussi dans les communautés comme les Bédiques et les Bassari en haut aussi, c'est des cérémonies qui se passent tous les années. Et pourquoi, quel est le rôle aussi du musée communautaire en Afrique? Parce que ça permet la préservation du patrimoine. Et là, il y a l'engagement aussi de la communauté. La communauté, au lieu d'être spectateur, devient acteur. Et aussi, il y a l'approche aussi. Parce que le musée, l'architecture même du musée peut montrer l'ancrage du musée à la société. La plupart de nos musées, comme je l'ai dit, c'est des bâtiments recyclés, des bâtiments modernes qui ne reflètent pas la société. Il y a aussi la résistance à la modernité qui constitue aussi l'élément essentiel qui a poussé surtout la communauté à créer ces musées. Aussi l'interprétation du patrimoine, il y a aussi les légendes, les populaires, les cultes, aussi les mythes qui sont véhiculés. Et il y a aussi une symbiose entre le patrimoine matériel et le patrimoine immatériel. Là, le musée devient un miroir de la communauté. Il y a ces pratiques, comme je vous l'ai dit, il y a le musée de Moulombe qui reflète la culture Diola à travers la Casa Impluvium. C'est une architecture qu'on trouve au Sénégal aussi. Il y a les patrimoines qui sont placés dans le contexte d'utilisation et la société est garant et protège surtout ces musées. Et surtout, ce qui est très important, la communauté est impliquée dans la gestion et aussi dans la médiation culturelle. Il y a d'autres initiatives qui permettent aussi de transformer le musée comme gardien de la mémoire collective. Il y a les provinces historiques, il y a les anciens royaumes du Sénégal qui ont été balayés par la colonisation. Et là, nous, à l'école et à l'université, on se croirait que l'histoire de l'Afrique commence avec au XIe siècle, avec les premiers contacts avec les Arabes et ensuite les Européens. Mais avant, il y avait des sociétés bien organisées, des royaumes, des chefferies traditionnelles, qui le patrimoine a été pillé et exproprié et déporté dans des musées européens et dont la plupart se trouvent en France. Et si on veut aussi que ces musées puissent jouer un rôle dans l'éducation, il faut qu'on réhabilite ces provinces, et aussi en utilisant aussi le savoir-faire traditionnel et aussi l'artisanat. Et enfin, il y a aussi des sites mémoriels comme le Diola, le mémorial du Diola, qui va être inauguré bientôt. Et aussi, il y a une communauté aussi au Sénégal, la communauté mouride, qui est bien structurée, qui a imaginé la conception du musée du mouridisme pour montrer sa contribution aussi. Là, on a une cartographie des musées. Ici, on a les premiers musées qui étaient installés dans les principaux villes coloniaux comme Dakar, Saint-Louis, Gorée. Et après, à partir des années 80, il y a l'action de l'État et surtout la contribution de la communauté qui a fait que on a une densité de musées qui se propage aussi avec une diversité. Il y a des musées régionaux, mais aussi des musées communautaires. Et là, il y a aussi ce désir aussi de la communauté africaine de contribuer à la marche du monde. Il y a d'abord le musée de civilisation noire qui valorise la civilisation noire, ce que l'homme noir apporte à la marche du monde, et aussi comme le disait Senghor, à la mondialisation, au rendez-vous du donner et du recevoir. Et bientôt, comme l'a dit Alain Gonou, il y a l'ouverture aussi du musée du Vaudou, qui est aussi un musée universel qui va aussi valoriser la culture et la religion vaudou. Et ça permet aussi de connecter l'Afrique et sa diaspora. Et si ça permet aussi de montrer comment la communauté africaine essaie de conserver son patrimoine et pour aussi dialoguer avec le reste du monde. Et là, en perspective aussi, on va essayer de voir comment les musées communautaires peuvent être des vitrines, des mémoires, des vitrines aussi des miroirs de l'artisanat traditionnel. À travers des projets que j'ai imaginés dans le cadre de mes recherches, comment valoriser l'artisanat traditionnel. Parce qu'à quelques kilomètres de Dakar, il y a une localité qui se trouve là-bas, Ngaye Mekhe, qui est connue au Sénégal et en Afrique par la qualité des chaussures qui sont fabriquées là-bas. Et ça a duré avant la colonisation et ça continue jusqu'à présent. Et à travers ces musées qui ressemblent à la société, qui ressemblent à la communauté, et même l'architecture même est symbolique pour montrer comment cet artisanat résiste à la modernité. Et ça, c'est à l'état de projet qu'on essaie de valoriser. C'est des musées vitrines qui vont montrer et valoriser l'artisanat traditionnel. Et pour finir, je pense que je vais lancer un plaidoyer pour la jeunesse africaine. Je pense que ces discussions sont utiles parce qu'ils vont permettre d'identifier les projets, parce que la jeunesse africaine a besoin de formation et aussi d'accompagnement. Vous voyez tout ce qui se passe, il y a des désespoirs. Il y a beaucoup de jeunes qui bravent l'océan pour rejoindre l'Europe. Pourquoi ça? Parce que des objets qui appartenaient à des communautés ont été arrachés et ont intégré des musées. Et il y a aussi le fait qu'en Afrique, le développement est organisé dans des capitales et des régions. Il y a l'exode rural. Et les musées africains ne sont pas beaucoup, il n'y a pas beaucoup de postes de profil pour la jeunesse. Et je pense que là, il nous faut vraiment identifier des mécanismes pour aider cette jeunesse dans la formation, surtout dans la restauration du patrimoine culturel. Et il nous faut ça des experts. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for your inspiring presentation. Our colleague from Senegal shows a lot of things, raised some very important questions. Museums are not only the places for keeping the collections and our collective memory, but also places for communities' participation. And in the end, it shows some of the difficulties that we have bringing young people to the museums and the important role of the museums, because museums are as our colleague said, especially on cities, but also the importance of small museums to bring persons to that small isolated museums, community museums, eco-museums and so on, in order to bring together people and his own traditions. So we have 2 more presentations. I ask some with technical support if you have our colleagues online or not. They are not online? Okay. 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 Unfortunately, our colleague Jerome Evano from Cora Museum have some technical problems. He cannot join us. I'm just asking if the third presentation, Mustafa Hussein from Somalia, is online. I don't know. No, also not online. Well, good news. We are going to lunch earlier. Okay. The other news. I give the floor to our colleagues to raise some questions because I think this matter about community museums and especially the role of communities in these questions of heritage is quite important. Our colleague shows a lot of examples of museums that are on Senegal, not only in Senegal, but we are trying to bring together this approach between persons, between people and our communities, of course, and the legacy and our heritage. So I ask if someone has some question or, okay, thank you. I think he's our colleague from Australia and our colleagues also. Okay, so if you have a microphone, okay, thank you so much for your participation. Going to join you here.
Thank you very much. By way of introduction, my wife and I are from Australia. I'm an Aboriginal person from the Narragansett Nation, and I'm here to represent a number of Aboriginal tribes, both to make connections with people actually at this conference. We're at the beginning of starting our keeping places, which are small community-based museums, and we need expertise and knowledge and sharing of ideas to help us on our way. So we're at the very beginning, but we represent community, and I guess it's appropriate at this particular presentation to reflect that the presentation on Senegal so captures our thoughts in terms of what storytelling is. We use storytelling in our healing, and we use storytelling in our education. It's a fundamental strategy that we use. For Australians, we've got roughly 300 tribes, and we're all sovereign people, but none of us are recognised by our government, and there's no treaty, and our story is one of recapturing our identity and using any means we can to be able to do that. The way that we are thinking of doing it is exactly like having traditional presentations as in a building, etc. But because of the very nature of our culture, which is land-based and very much connected to country, the way we tell our stories is really on country, with country, outside, talking about the cultural aspects of water, trees, all that sort of thing. Every time we have some of our artefacts returned to us, it's an affirmation of our identity and a strengthening of our nation building. And I guess one of the things that we really want to do, and particularly after this presentation here, is to have dialogue with our African brothers and sisters about your storytelling and how that lines up with our storytelling, but also emphasising the healing component that comes with the recapturing of the stories and the strengthening of our identities. So I guess that's a comment, but if anybody or you would like to respond, that would be good.
Thank you so much. Our colleague from Australia raised a very important question. Of course, objects, material objects are important because they belong to someone, but also we cannot forget the power of oral tradition, immaterial, the power of storytelling. The objects are important because they belong to real people and tell us histories. So I think it's a very good question. If you want to some comments, okay, and then I will give the floor to our colleagues to raise more questions. Thank you.
Je pense que c'est intéressant. On peut déjà présent essayer d'imaginer des formes de collaboration parce que c'est un patrimoine qui est vivant. C'est quelque chose que nous vivons et on a la chance qu'il y a une partie de la communauté qui continue à pratiquer, aussi à produire des éléments identitaires. Et je pense qu'il y a moyen de travailler avec l'Afrique et de voir quelles sont les stratégies à mettre en place pour créer un réseau pour mieux valoriser ces communautés qui sont souvent restées en rade par la modernité. Merci.
Thank you so much. Next question, please.
Mario?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Juliana.
Yes, I think it's a pity that your panel is so short. If you have the abstract of Ivano and Hussein, I think you can read in order to know which would be the arguments to be treated in the panel.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so before that, Juliana, if you don't mind, I give the floor to our colleagues to make more questions, and then I read the both abstracts. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I absolutely love that you are engaging communities, even in the design of new museums. Is there any process you're following in this design process? Because architectural, civil works design is enormous and it is political, and in public sector, obviously, it's extremely lengthy. So how then are you engaging the communities for this significant process in designing the... And could you please, when you're talking about it, could we go back to that second last slide? It was so beautiful. Thank you.
I think there is another question for our colleague. Yes.
Okay. Oui. Je peux répondre bien. Je réponds directement à la question.
Yes, please.
Ok, parce que là, actuellement, moi, je suis ouvert à tout ce qui est en train de se passer au Bénin. Parce que je pense qu'ils ont la chance d'avoir un président qui est ouvert et qui est enraciné, qui accorde beaucoup d'importance au développement du musée. Et là, en tant que jeune acteur et qui réfléchit sur le développement du musée, quelles sont les politiques à mettre en place pour acclimater le musée en Afrique, proposer des musées africains autrement. Parce qu'il faut qu'on essaie de créer cette rupture. Ce qui fait l'importance, je pense, que des musées en Afrique, il faut que ce soit des musées dynamiques, des centres d'interprétation, des centres qui sont connectés à la société. Il y a beaucoup de pratiques culturelles qui sont laissées en rade. Parce que l'objet, on peut dire c'est un élément de la culture, mais il y a beaucoup d'éléments qui composent le patrimoine immatériel qui est laissé en rade dans les musées. Si on essaie à travers ces projets de développement de musées communautaires, ça participe à une politique de territorialisation des politiques culturelles. Parce que si on concentre tout dans les capitales, à Dakar, dans des villes dont la population n'est pas trop sensible à ce qui se passe dans les autres territoires, les musées, on trouve souvent ces musées qui sont fréquentés par des touristes. Et si le patrimoine est valorisé dans son contexte originel, je pense que ça, il n'y a pas une meilleure façon de pérenniser ça et aussi surtout de fixer cette population. Parce que la population, s'il n'a pas les moyens de se développer, ils ne trouvent pas les ressources, ils sont obligés de venir, il y a l'exode rural. Et ça, je pense que ça participent à l'appauvrissement économique et culturel des sociétés.
J'ai une question.
Okay, thank you very much. We have one more question in the room, and also because we have new technologies, we have a question online. So I give the floor for the persons in the room, and then we're going to read the question online also for our colleague can answer. Okay, thank you.
Oui, j'ai une question. Et merci beaucoup pour votre exposé. Et je voudrais savoir si le musée communautaire dont vous parlez, c'est des musées classiques avec l'architecture dans un lieu bien déterminé, ou c'est des musées vivants mais qui ne répondent pas directement à la logique classique de musées que nous avons.
Oui, c'est des musées, c'est pas des musées classiques. C'est des musées, comme j'ai dit, c'est des éléments, c'est des musées qui ont été construits par la communauté. C'est des cases traditionnelles. Ils n'obéissent pas au nombre de conservation parce qu'il y a des musées qui se retrouvent en Casamance, c'est des musées hors mur. Le patrimoine, il est valorisé dans son contexte. Là, on n'a pas, le visiteur n'est pas, le musée n'est pas est décloisonné. Il n'y a pas de normes de conservation. La population est là, il gère, elle participe à la gestion et à la valorisation de ce patrimoine. Et chez les Diola, il y a des normes de conservation. Je pense que c'est une conservation imaginaire. C'est des esprits, c'est des éléments qui protègent l'environnement. Parce que l'art et la protection de la nature, dans la plupart des sociétés africaines, c'est lié. Parce qu'à travers la nature, on vénère les ancêtres, les esprits, tout ça. Et c'est pourquoi, à partir des années 80 à 2000, on a le développement des musées, des écomusées. Des écomusées avec, on utilise l'architecture traditionnelle, la case, aussi les objets qui sont replacés dans le contexte d'utilisation. Et ça permet aussi une autre relecture de l'art africain qui est le visiteur. Il sera acteur et aussi il va comprendre comment ces objets-là sont utilisés. Parce que dans nos musées, c'est des cartels. On a le titre, la provenance et l'année de collecte. Et des fois, des musées comme le musée Théodore Monod, il y a des informations qui sont lacunaires. Et là, c'est ça qui rend important le développement des musées communautaires. Le patrimoine est conjugué sur place et il y a des éléments identitaires et ethnographiques et aussi le patrimoine matériel est valorisé avec le patrimoine immatériel. Merci.
Thank you. I think now is Jean-Paul? No? Or to the question online? Okay, if you don't mind, could you read the question online? Yes, you, if you don't mind. Okay, thank you so much.
Bonjour à tous, je me nomme Alas Sis, gestionnaire du patrimoine au Musée des Forts Sénégal, et j'ai une question technicienne. Réseau de télécommunications est étudiant à l'EPA. En 3 et année, j'ai une question. Dans quelle mesure la création de musées communautaires peut-elle être considérée comme une forme de conservation située et quels en sont les principaux défis? La question c'est...
Alassane, oui.
Okay, thank you so much for online participation.
C'est ça, je pense que ça va faire plaisir à Naomi parce que la conservation située, ça commence à se développer en Afrique. Ça a existé parce qu'il y avait des techniques de conservation endogènes qui ont été récemment à l'ordre par les techniciens et les professionnels des musées africains au détriment des normes standards de conservation. Mais avec un peu de recul, et je pense que là, il y a Naomi et son équipe qui commencent à travailler sur ça, sur le développement des techniques de conservation endogène du patrimoine avec des éléments naturels. Et ça, je pense que Naomi est mieux outillée et mieux placée pour répondre à cette question parce que ça, c'est quelque chose que j'ai découvert avec elle, la conservation située. Merci.
Oh, okay, I think we have 3 more questions. Okay, first, you don't mind? Thank you. Yeah, if you don't mind.
Ok, merci pour la parole. En fait, je crois que par rapport à votre intervention, ça montre toute l'importance qu'il y a pour notamment le continent africain d'approfondir cette question liée au musée. Voilà. Donc, je commence déjà par revenir sur un peu les citations que vous avez faites, notamment en ce qui concerne le président Alpha Konaré, quand il avait demandé de tuer le modèle occidental du musée. Aujourd'hui, nous, on parle de décolonisation, et je vais paraphraser M. Gaël de Guichen, qui est un grand professionnel et un connaisseur du secteur muséal africain. Voilà. Comment se traduit ce meurtre du modèle occidental? Je crois qu'on n'est vraiment pas arrivé à comprendre et aller au fond de cette pensée d'Alpha Omar Konaré. Et par rapport à ce qui a été dit sur les musées dits communautaires, je pense que le musée, c'est un musée tout court. Et il s'agit maintenant pour nous de peut-être trouver le type, enfin, la façon de travailler véritablement, sans forcément appeler ces institutions-là des musées forcément. C'est ce que les communautés ou bien les peuples eux-mêmes veulent désigner comme institution en charge de la gestion de leur patrimoine culturel qui importe. À cet effet-là, j'aimerais avoir votre avis sur quelque chose. On a beaucoup épilogué sur le fait que les musées, il y a un grand désintérêt des populations locales pour les musées. Et on sait pourquoi beaucoup cette situation-là se passe. Parce que les gens vont dans les musées et de ce qu'on entend, ils disent mais c'est quelque chose qui fait partie de notre quotidien. Vous les mettez dans une maison et vous dites de venir les regarder encore. Je les ai chez moi. Est-ce que cette façon de procéder là, en disant que les musées sont faits pour les communautés, on expose des objets des communautés là-bas et on leur demande de venir voir, ce n'est pas une façon aussi d'enfermer les musées, voilà, et les communautés sans créer d'ouverture. Parce qu'un musée, c'est un lieu de découverte, c'est aller vers l'autre. On a dit c'est le rendez-vous du donner, du recevoir. Mais si c'est mettre uniquement mes propres objets et demander à mes populations de venir les regarder sans faire d'ouverture sur les autres, c'est une façon quand même de créer un cloisonnement des populations. Voilà, je pense que moi, c'est mon point de vue. Voilà pourquoi je pense que les appels qu'on lance à créer des musées universels, tout ça, pour moi, ça n'a pas trop de sens. Ça veut dire qu'en fait, chaque peuple a envie de connaître l'autre. Si dans un musée dit communautaire, c'est seulement les objets de la communauté qui y sont, ça va devenir un peu compliqué. Mais si on va faire découvrir d'autres communautés en enrichissant les connexions, en présentant autre chose, je pense que c'est là véritablement que le musée en tant qu'espace d'éducation, de découverte, de dialogue entre les peuples va avoir tout son sens. Voilà. Et je vais, après votre avis sur ça, j'aimerais savoir, par exemple, pour ce nouveau comité international Sustain, comment vous arrivez à voir l'interaction qui se fait entre ces musées-là et les idéaux de ce comité international en termes de promotion du développement durable? Parce qu'en réalité, je crois que le système s'appuie sur les ODD. Comment les communautés qui ne sont pas forcément au courant de tous ces objectifs de développement durable là, mettre ça en œuvre dans les musées pour lesquels on dit que c'est fait pour eux et puis bon, pour lesquels ils existent. Voilà. Merci.
Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup pour la question aussi, pour le commentaire. Et je pense que c'est très intéressant ce que vous venez de dire. Il faut qu'en Afrique, on essaie aussi. Ces musées communautaires, comme vous l'avez dit, comme vous dites, c'est des musées identitaires qui reflètent la société. Pourquoi les Africains ne fréquentent pas les musées? Parce que c'est des musées, comme vous l'avez dit, la plupart des musées, c'est des objets qu'on connaît. Et on connaît mieux ces objets-là, maîtrise mieux les discours qui sont dans les musées. C'est des objets, c'est un discours un peu tronqué. Et le développement de ces musées communautaires, comme vous le dites, je ne suis pas d'accord avec vous, le développement des musées communautaires peut aider. Parce que ça permet à la communauté de participer à la conservation. Et pourquoi, même la restitution, il y a beaucoup de gens qui disent qu'il faut restituer les objets aux communautés. Même si cette communauté décide de brûler ces objets parce que les objets avaient un cycle de vie dans la communauté. On fabriquait les objets, on les utilisait, mais après, il y a la mort aussi. Les objets devaient mourir aussi. Et il y a des espaces de conservation spécialisés parce que Abdoulaye Sokhna Diop a dit qu'avant l'arrivée des Européens, il y avait des musées. Parce qu'au Bénin, au Sénégal, tous les rois avaient des collections qui étaient, c'était des collecteurs. Et la société avait des objets qui étaient qu'on utilisait pour faire l'agriculture, pour aussi faire des pratiques culturelles. Ces objets-là, c'est la communauté qui sait faire la production, l'utilisation, et il y a une littérature qui se cache derrière ces objets. Et le cas des musées universels, je pense que c'est quelque chose d'intéressant parce que si on parle du musée Théodore Monod, le musée Théodore Monod, ça représente toute l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Et si à travers ce musée-là, on pouvait avoir d'autres musées en Afrique, des musées africains qui vont représenter l'Afrique dans sa diversité, parce qu'on peut avoir un musée au Bénin, on trouve des objets de toute l'Afrique. Les Béninois vont connaître la culture sénégalaise. Et pareil aussi, en Afrique du Sud, on ouvre les frontières pour permettre la circulation des objets et aussi des idées, des technologies, des savoir-faire pour qu'il y ait des musées africains qui vont mieux représenter le continent. Et si on a seulement des musées nationaux avec une collection sénégalaise, la population ne peut pas venir. Mais si on essaie de faire ce travail de collaboration entre musées et communautés africaines, ça va porter des prix. Et concernant aussi ICOM System, je pense que c'est un nouveau comité qu'on a créé il y a de cela 2 ans. Et là, on essaie de miser sur le développement durable des musées, en accordant une place très importante à la communauté, parce que la communauté, on peut dire la communauté, c'est elle qui gère, qui préserve la culture, mais surtout en synergie aussi, c'est la communauté aussi qui veille à la protection de l'environnement, de la nature. Et ça, on lui accorde beaucoup d'importance pour lutter contre le réchauffement climatique et surtout maintenir ces populations-là dans leur lieu pour qu'elles puissent vivre de leur patrimoine et aussi contribuer aussi à la préservation de la nature et surtout faciliter aussi le dialogue entre les communautés, la libre circulation des idées, des pensées et surtout ouvrir la mondialisation. Merci.
Thank you so much. We have 2 more questions, one from Terry, another from Elk from ICOM Austria. So Terry, if you don't mind.
Thank you very much. I think mine is more of just a comment, and first to thank Mohammed for that nice, lovely presentation, especially of community museums. And I must say, coming from Zambia, that I relate with the issue of community museums. What we have seen in the last few years in my country is many communities in the rural areas asking to have their own museums so that they can tell their own stories in that particular museum. And the National Museums Board of Zambia has been giving technical support to many different communities to come up with museums. And just a rider on what Caroline said regarding the designs, one of the museums up north of the country that wants to come up with a museum, when we last went there, we did not go as experts. We went there to listen and to learn from them regarding what they wanted to do. And when it came to the designs, we said to them, it's not us to decide. You must decide. It is your institution. It is your museum. What is it that you would like to have? What kind of museum would you like to see? And they said to us, the most important thing for us as a people, or the Lunda people, is the hammock, which we carry our traditional leader when going elsewhere and doing traditional ceremony. And they decided our museum would like to see it in the design of a hammock where our chief sits on. So we, as museum professionals, then give only technical support of what they must think through regarding what a museum should be, but they decide themselves what story they want to see in this particular museum. And in this particular way, when they get involved as communities in development of the museum, then there is a sense of ownership of this particular institution. The stories that are told in there are their own stories. And because they can see and relate with the institution, then we don't have or we overcome the challenge of people not coming or local people not coming to these institutions. Why they do not come is mostly they consider these institutions as foreign institutions, foreign concepts. They're built in the city centers, in private areas, huge, intimidating for the local communities, and they don't see themselves there. And the narratives that are told there are not their own narratives, are narratives that demean them sometimes or most times. But if we can have this bottom-up approach, especially for communities that are far in the rural areas, indigenous people getting involved in making up or coming up or developing these particular institutions, then we start winning and we change the museology from the way it has been. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Terry, and for sharing also your experience in Zambia. And I think it's very transversal because we are dealing with the same situations with small museums in rural areas and low density population also in Europe and around other parts around the world. So if you want to comment on Terry.
C'est intéressant. Je pense que Terry, on a besoin de son expérience. Je pense que là, il nous faut, en tant qu'Africains, essayer de créer un panel de discussion aussi, de partager les expériences, tout ce que vous êtes en train de faire dans votre propre pays, ce qui se passe au Bénin, et aussi avec l'ICOM Afrique aussi, qui commence à se développer aussi, à fédérer les musées et les professionnels africains. Je pense que c'est un panel qui peut nous permettre aussi d'échanger ce savoir et aussi de proposer des modèles et aussi des réponses aux problèmes auxquels sont confrontés les musées africains. Merci.
Okay. Elke, ICOM Austria.
Yes, thank you so much. Elke Kellner, ICOM Austria, ICOM Europe. I very much agree with the last point, because I think in European museums, see the classical concepts of museums, we are very well aware how to work with objects to tell our stories, our history with the objects we have in our collection. And I think we have less experience in how to address the intangible heritage, the intangible stories and tradition that we want to communicate. In Austrian rural areas, we have small museums. We call them regional museums because they're located in the small villages, and it's the same thing you are telling. It's mostly addressing the history of the rural communities and their backgrounds, their religion or farming structures and so on. But I think it would be important for us together to develop means how to represent the intangible heritage. Maybe it's not so much about just how the communities kind of pick their stories, but to say what intangible heritage is really important for us and how can we develop that with the different views, because communities are not coherent in a lot of ways. We have also the modern topics of feminism and how are we relating maybe to tribal structures or modern concerns that we want to address, but we have certain topics like climate change, sustainability, the UN SDGs, how do we address colonialism and past, and how do we address maybe modern colonialism that is coming from now other countries to Africa or different societies. So it would be maybe a concept that ICOM should address with working groups or conferences to together, as also the colleague from Australia said, it's a topic that has to be addressed worldwide and to develop together in the frame of ICOM the possibilities of intangible heritage and how we can present that in a museum context. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do you want to comment? Okay. Small comment.
Okay. Un commentaire. Oui, je pense que c'est intéressant, d'où l'importance, ce qu'on appelle les objets ambassadeurs. Parce que c'est bien d'avoir des musées africains dans de grandes villes européennes, dans des musées. C'est des objets ambassadeurs. Et pour voir ces objets autrement, ces objets vivants, il faut partir en Afrique. C'est pourquoi nous, à travers ces musées qu'on veut inventer en Afrique, que ce soit des musées qui vont présenter les objets autrement, et aussi cette synergie entre le patrimoine matériel et l'immatériel pour donner vie à ces objets. Parce que si on fait la reproduction de la scénographie, on essaie de respecter les mêmes normes qui se passent ici en Europe, la personne qui vient au musée Quai Branly ou bien au musée du Louvre, il voit un objet africain qui est figé avec une petite description. Et il retourne en Afrique, il voit que cet objet-là ne bouge pas, il n'y a pas une évolution. C'est intéressant de venir en Afrique. C'est pourquoi il faut déjà à présent commencer à imaginer de nouveaux modèles de musées qui sont des centres vivants qui vont donner aux visiteurs une nouvelle lecture de l'art africain dans sa forme vivante. Merci.
Okay. I think there's one more question, the last question from the room, if you don't mind, please. Go ahead.
Oui, je ne sais pas si c'est une question, mais pour avoir entendu ce que j'ai entendu, je me dois de faire des réflexions. Je pense qu'il faut qu'on s'intéresse davantage à ce que peuvent ressentir les visiteurs, les publics qui viennent dans les musées, en particulier dans les musées africains. Moi, j'ai eu la main dans le Cambouis et j'ai été surpris, agréablement surpris. Et nous avions et nous avons toujours un public otage. Ils ont les forces, les élèves, les écoles, etc. Bon, on peut les drainer, on peut faire du chiffre avec. Et quand on sort de ça, et quand on sortait de ça, il y a plus grand monde, après il y a les touristes. Mais pourquoi les locaux, là, les gens, machin, ils n'y vont pas? Là, on se rend compte que la visite du musée, aller au musée, c'est une sortie, c'est un moment social. C'est important. On y va habillé, tiré à 4 épingles. On ne va pas voir des choses ordinaires. C'est un moment dans la vie, dans le temps, on prend le temps, etc. Mais quand on arrive à ça, on se dit, tiens, on ne présente pas n'importe quoi aux gens là. On doit leur présenter pas des choses ordinaires, même si c'est des choses ordinaires, ça doit être des choses ordinaires présentées de façon extraordinaire. Qu'ils en aient envie. Quand on part de ça, on commence à trouver, à voir ce dialogue, à chercher ce qui peut faire réveiller les gens, ce qui peut les intéresser, ce qui peut les entraîner à parler, etc. Ils n'ont pas besoin d'aller voir des poteries alignées, des instruments de musique alignés, c'est pas ça leur truc. Pas du tout, non. Ils ont des sentiments, ils veulent se réjouir, ils veulent discuter entre eux, ils veulent apprendre. Les gens veulent apprendre, tous les gens que moi j'ai vus, presque 300 000 personnes, sont curieux de demander « Ah, ça c'est comme ça, etc. » Donc je pense qu'il faut qu'on fasse attention à ça. Pour ce qu'on fait au Bénin, évidemment, il y a toujours des gens qui parlent « Ah bon, il y a des musées seulement ici, il faut faire les musées aussi dans les villages, etc. » On a réfléchi au sujet. Donc, bon, vous savez, il y a eu, pour avoir été à l'EPA, le Mali avait lancé les banques culturelles. Oui. Malheureusement, à cause de la situation militaire, je pense qu'elles ont disparu. Après, le Cameroun a lancé les cases patrimoniales. Nous, on a accompagné tout ça en tant qu'EPA, et qui étaient des cases faites par les chefs traditionnels, surtout dans l'Ouest Cameroun. Et l'Ouest Cameroun, c'est une région relativement puissante, où la chefferie est assez puissante. Et c'était bien pour les chefs camerounais de créer un espace, mais ils l'ont créé en travaillant sérieusement avec des professionnels. Et aujourd'hui, il y a ce qu'ils appellent la route des chefferies, qui dans l'Ouest Cameroun fonctionne. Moi, quand j'étais à l'EPA, c'est l'une des actions qui m'a le plus touché. Il y a eu un palais, Fumban, un grand palais, dans l'Ouest Cameroun qui a brûlé. Donc, ils m'ont demandé de venir parce que c'est des trésors qui sont partis. Je suis allé, J'ai vu ce qu'on peut voir de façon classique. Ils m'ont dit qu'ils avaient pris toutes les dispositions. Ils avaient des extincteurs. J'ai demandé, mais qui sait manipuler l'extincteur? Personne. Bon, j'ai dit, écoutez, j'ai compris le problème. J'ai dit, écoutez, et les chefs étaient là, mais c'était un désastre, hein, moral, spirituel. J'ai dit, bon, donnez-moi 2 ou 3 personnes qui seront formées à l'école et ils vont s'occuper de ça. Ils m'ont dit, moi, il faut que vous veniez. J'ai dit non. Ils ont fini. Il y avait une trentaine de chefferies. Hein. Ils ont fini tous par me désigner 1 ou 2 personnes. Et on a organisé des sessions chez eux, qui ont été des sessions extraordinaires. Tous les chefs étaient là. Et la session, c'était pour leur dire quel est leur rôle en tant que chef, en tant que gardien de ces collections-là. Comment est-ce que, évidemment, ce que nous avons utilisé, c'est le code d'éthique de l'ICOM, comment est-ce que, etc. On peut s'occuper de ces choses. I'm sorry to
Intéressant.
Yes, to speak a lot. Donc, ils sont sortis de ça avec ces projets de casse patrimoniale. Et ce n'est pas des endroits où on va tout le temps. Ça fonctionne comment? Ils ont une grande cérémonie, un grand mariage, les Camerounais sont comme ça, les gens viennent de partout, des invitations viennent de partout, et à cette occasion, les gens s'en vont. Aujourd'hui, il y a des amis, des collègues, etc. Ah, ils vont dans telle ville parce qu'il y a tel mariage, j'irai voir la casse patrimoniale. Bref, c'est pour dire que aller au musée, ça doit être des moments dans la vie sociale. Et au Bénin, pour en finir, nous avons décidé de créer ce qu'on appelle des pavillons. Les grands musées peuvent se déplacer n'importe où sur le territoire pour créer à un certain moment un pavillon pour présenter quelque chose. Je vous remercie. Mais on va continuer cette discussion. Mais j'aimerais quand même que on réfléchisse davantage à cette redynamisation des musées en regardant comment nous pouvons servir davantage les publics, les visiteurs, pour ne pas les contraindre dans une sorte d'écoliers, d'études, etc.
Je vais rapidement ajouter quelque chose à ce qu'Alain m'a dit, 30 secondes, 1 minute. Vous savez, le musée ici, c'est un espace, c'est tout le temps contemplatif, on est tout le temps en train, on est très sérieux, on est très silencieux dans le musée. Je n'ai jamais, dans les musées africains que moi je connais, que j'ai visités, c'est les endroits les plus bruyants que je connais. C'est très bruyant. Celui qui est venu visiter, parfois, vous êtes debout en train de regarder un objet, puis il vient et il commence à commenter l'objet. Pourtant, il ne fait pas partie du musée, mais il vous dit ce que lui il pense de l'objet. Et je pense que c'est comme ça qu'il faut commencer à réinventer le musée africain. Il ne faut pas qu'il ressemble au musée occidental. Il faut qu'on arrête avec l'Occident qui se déplace vers l'Afrique. Jean-Paul a parlé du meurtre du modèle occidental. Oui, il faut que finalement donc, on arrive à commettre le meurtre parfait pour avoir donc le musée qu'il nous faut en Afrique. Merci. Peut-être même que le thème musée, il faudrait peut-être l'écrire maintenant et le barrer.
Okay, thank you so much for your sharing. Now I have good news because ICOM family is about inclusion, and I think there is now conditions to have Jérôme Evano online for making the presentation. Jérôme is a project manager and research coordinator, and also member of and curator of Cora Museum. So if Jérôme is online, we'd like to hear your presentation. Go ahead, please.
Que vous m'entendez? Est-ce que quelqu'un peut me répondre?
Yes, we are listening to you.
Ok.
S'il vous plaît,
Et de réseau, donc ça pourrait couper. Donc moi je m'appelle Jérôme et je suis l'initiateur, on peut dire le conservateur, et je gère le musée de la Cora qui est situé en Côte d'Ivoire, dans un petit village à 70 km d'Abidjan. J'ai créé ce musée par passion. Moi, je viens pas du milieu muséal, mais j'ai créé ce musée par passion parce que je joue moi-même la kora. La kora est un instrument de musique africain, d'Afrique de l'Ouest. C'est bon? Vous m'entendez? Je peux continuer?
Ok, merci.
Yes, yes. Oui.
Ok. Et donc, ce qui est, alors je viens juste de suivre, de suivre un peu les propos.
Dans l'autre, c'est la main à filmer, mais maintenant il faut retrouver la maquette.
Dans le sens où je puis le musée donne des paysages de la plage, le musée propose des concerts. Voilà, c'est vraiment. J'aime beaucoup cette histoire de réinventer le musée africain et je pense qu'on est dans cette dynamique. Maintenant, en termes. Ce qui me paraît intéressant à souligner,
Yes, we are facing some
historique.
technical issues.
La majorité. Vous m'entendez toujours?
Non.
Bon, je continue. En tout cas. Vous m'entendez pas? Je vais continuer. J'espère que ça passe. Je disais, la majorité des artefacts historiques qui sont dans le musée ont été trouvés en Europe et en Occident et ramenés en Afrique par mon intermédiaire et par mes finances personnelles. Et c'est en ça que je trouve que la décolonisation des musées était importante pour nous et c'est pour ça que je vous avais proposé un travail à ce propos. Qu'est-ce que je peux vous dire de plus? Ben, c'est déjà pas mal. On est vraiment inclus dans la communauté. On n'a aucun financement. On a à peu près entre 300, maintenant on est peut-être entre 300 et 500 visiteurs par an. Moitié, moitié, pour moitié des personnes locales issues des communautés environnantes et l'autre moitié, beaucoup de touristes ou d'expatriés qui travaillent à Abidjan. On est vraiment en demande d'échange avec d'autres musées pour présenter notre travail et nos artefacts et notre musique. Et puis voilà ce que je peux vous dire rapidement. Je suis désolé d'être aussi peu protocolaire dans ma présentation.
Jérôme, if you don't mind, you can conclude your presentation, please, because we are dealing with some problems with the time and we have several panels after this. Okay? If you can conclude now, thank you very much.
I have finished. Just to conclude, thank you for ICOM to invite me to this conference, and I have finished. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation, Jérôme. It was a pleasure. Okay, now for concluding and finally have lunch, just because ICOM is about inclusion, I will just read the abstract of the lecture of Mustafa Hussein. Mustafa Hussein is the head of collection and cataloging of Somaliland National Museum. He's a skilled cultural heritage specialist and brings significant expertise in museum curation. Of course, through this leadership, the Somalian National Museum has become a critical institution in the region, contributing for the broader conversation on museums, innovation, and post-colonial identity reconstruction. So the abstract is about reclaiming the past, rebuilding identity, the role of Somaliland National Museum in post-colonial heritage preservation. The Somaliland National Museum, located in the heart of Hargeisa, serves not only for the cultural institution, but also as a symbol of the resilience and the reclamation of identity. Despite facing challenges such as the lack of international recognition and limited institutional support, the museum has become a beacon for cultural continuity and collective memory, offering a space where history and identity of Somaliland can be reclaimed and celebrated. This presentation examines the difficulty faced in the building of heritage institutions without the colonial area collections, often found in many Western museums. With this absence, the Somaliland National Museum has had the opportunity to create an indigenous approach to the museology, rooted in local traditions and realities of region. Through his experience at the museum, he discussed the community involvement and the youth engagement as a crucial part of empowering people, and the works continue in the sense of a national pride of solidarity. This paper also explores the museum activities' contribution to the global movement of decolonization museums, focusing on the unique challenge of operating in a not recognized state. The museum community-driven approach ensures that the local populations are engaged with the documentation and curation of their own heritage, creating a narrative that reflects their lived experience. As a key aspect of this work is the cataloging traditions of artifacts and documentation of oral histories, which are essential for the reconstruction of a national history. Okay, thank you so much in the name of Mustafa Hussein. Well, it was a challenge, but also very grateful to moderate this panel, and we have the opportunity to have conversation and share experience during the lunch. So thank you everybody for being here. Thank you. And thank you online also.